Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Backyard Professor live show tonight. I have rounded up a whole cadre of different types of professors for tonight's show, and you guys are gonna love what these guys have got for us. Let's just get going here, get started, and we shall have a splendiferous fun evening compared to this entire long conference day. Oh, you know what? I just realized something. I just outdid Conference for Excitement in 1 minute than they had in 8 hours. That's got to be a world record. So I have two of my lovely dear friends here, Rebecca Biblioteca, the schoolyard professor, and I've got my good friend Landon Brophy, the junkyard professor. How you guys doing tonight?
We are fabulous. Just recovering, like you said, from the conference weekend and excited to be here with you and all your viewers tonight.
We are going to have some fun. Let me just briefly explain with you. I've already told everybody this, but I get to do it for those who haven't seen me or heard me yet. Rebecca and Landon do the Mormonish podcast, and I watched several of their podcast, but this one that we're going to do tonight is, bless their hearts, they agreed to come on and do a repeat podcast for you, my audience, simply because I watched this podcast and I quite frankly, I was flabbergasted. I was overwhelmed, and the work, the research that Landon and Rebecca has done on this topic, which is an amazing topic, you guys, because this is the brand new church topics, gospel topics essay that they put. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys. Did the church put this essay out since being fined by the SEC?
Yeah, it was put out on March 10th, and it's not a gospel topics essay like you think of the standard ones. They have what's called gospel, or they're called topics essays. And so it's in the topics essay, and they put it out March 10th. Just after they kind of snuck it in real quietly.
No, they wouldn't. Don't they blare it out with the Moroni's trumpet on the temple anymore? So let's say hi to the audience real quick. Looks like we have Dan Bogle. Welcome, my friend. Mark Crispin, Peter Higgs. Good to see you. Liz. Yeah, baby. For Mark Crispin. I always have to do that. Yeah, baby. Peter Higgs. Welcome. Mosia. Good to see you. Looks like we've got a crowd that's gathering. Welcome, everybody. We love having you here. Love these guys in the chat. Daisy May, good to see you. All right, so, here we go. I'm going to put a brag note here. It's going to cover you up a little bit, Rebecca, but Daisy May says, the Mormonish episode on this topic essay was amazing. Great job. I heard about it from you. So see, I'm spreading the word for you guys. Well, Daisy, we are going to bring you our lovely hosts of that. And we are going to, we're going to do a lot of repeat, but with me questioning, we're probably going to get some new information also. So, okay. So this essay, let's just be frank. Today in conference, And I know I made a big deal about this for about the week and a half or two after. So did you guys, actually. You did wonderful jobs covering I think all of us podcasters talked about this SEC fine. And I was indicating that I really think this general conference is going to be significant, because now the word, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first president, just three, the first presidency were the only ones that knew what was going on. Even Boyd K. Packer wasn't allowed in on it when he was alive. He wanted to be, and they said, it's on an need only know basis, and you don't need to know. Boyd K. Packer was told that, from what I've heard. So only the first presidency, and now that this has all come out, now the quorum of the 12 knows. Now the quorum of the 70s know. So I was speculating, now we get to see how deep this corruption goes, from breaking the law, hiding money, being filthy, stupid, dumb, unbelievably, insanely non-Jesus rich, and everyone voted to sustain. But did you notice what they did with the cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Undeniable.
Boom, boom, boom.
Wow.
Yeah.
They didn't show the stand. Oh.
Yeah.
Although nobody opposed. And if you were to oppose, you are supposed to talk to your state president. So there we go. So we know how deep the corruption goes. For real now, we've got the evidence. I'm pretty sure everybody's got to be in the. Can you imagine being one of the quorum of the 12 or one of the 70, wondering, they're doing that?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine. Yeah, I couldn't imagine being the auditor who had to give up and give the report today. Or yesterday on the second session. That was the guy I was watching.
Was that
over
a
eyes.
set up or what? That was ludicrous. Well, we want to report, brethren, everything is well. Thank you.
That's
status quo.
That
But
to me
maybe
was
it is
where all the
status quo.
suspense was for this conference, is what's going to happen with that report. Are they going to just do away with it like they did with the membership numbers when they were going down? Or are they going to say everything is fine, in which case they're basically saying the procedures that we've been doing that got us fined are all in accordance with our policies? I mean, what were they going to do? And I think RFM summed it up best in his conference, his after conference report, where, you know, the silence was really telling by the fact that they said exactly the same thing they say all the time. In essence, we know from the report, and there were more than just the first presidency who knew about it. The presiding bishopric also knows about it. So those 6 people know about it. And the fact that they got up there, they actually had done an audit on it in 2014 and 2017. And in the audit report, they said, you need to fix this. This isn't right. And they ignored it. So they found something, and yet they reported to the church in 2014 and 2017 that everything was in order. And it wasn't. And so they didn't report it. And so now we see that they're just going to rubber stamp anything, and you can't believe anything that they say in their financial report. It's useless, is what we found out today or yesterday.
Yeah. They're never going to be open with the truth. This church of truth is going to always hide the truth. And folks, tonight you're going to see that with an absolute astonishing vengeance. Why don't I let you guys take it away, and let's get this going, and you tell us, what is this essay and what is it about? Let's do a line by line, just like you did.
Okay, yeah, we'll go through it line by line. Basically, if you want to pull up the first slide there, Carrie, this is the essay on church finances. If you look over on the left-hand column there, you can see that there's quite a few different topics essays. These aren't the standard gospel topics essays that you think of, but they are topics essays that they put out. And of course, you know, the church, after they said they were going to pay the fine, they came out and said, you know, that we consider the matter closed. Well, after they said they considered the matter closed, they put out this essay, which is basically, I think, to reassure all the members that all is fine in Zion. The church finances have always been under the Lord's control. And so there's no need to worry. And so they put it out, and we started reading through it, and we just kind of started laughing because, as you may know, that Rebecca and I run a book club, the Good Book Club. And one of the things that we had run into as we were doing a lot of our reading is we kept coming across counterfeiting. It was popping up everywhere, and we were going, where is this counterfeiting coming from? I've never heard of this before. And so we decided to read, one of the books we decided to read was called Secret Combination, Evidence in Early Mormon Counterfeiting. It's by Kathleen Melanakis, and she actually came to our book club, but we went through her book and we put together some of the presentations. So some of this came from that. And then the rest is information that we went through as we went through the essay itself. And it's kind of interesting because if you've read the Gospel Topics essay, you know how the church operates. You start finding their little weasel words, or they start pointing to things that kind of key you in that something isn't right with what they're saying, or they're trying to divert. It's kind of like a magician who tries to divert you from what they're saying. So whenever they say they did this like all other churches, or like other people of the time, they did this, that's usually a clue that why are they saying that? Why are they trying to make it sound like this is normal operating procedure? Is it really normal operating procedure? So when we start seeing those in there, we'd start highlighting those, and then we'd start going and looking up, what is this? And is this in fact true? Did they really operate that way? So when we start reading through it, and we do have the gospel, we do have the essay, we're going to read through it line by line. We'll have Carrie, you'll read some of it. Rebecca will read some of it. I've highlighted in there, when you see bold areas, those are areas that are either those magic words that make you say, oh, let's look a little deeper, or they're words that point you to, oh, who's this guy, or what's this thing about? I haven't heard about this. Let me dive into that a little bit more. And so when you see those, we're going to dive into those things a little bit more. So that's basically how we got into it. Rebecca, am I missing anything?
I don't think so. I would just like to say that I think the church auditor's report was a perfect segue to this, because they basically said, it's all status quo. We're doing exactly what we've always done. This is it. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. They are doing exactly what they have always done.
This is where it backfires.
Yep.
For someone
Yep.
who looks a little deeper.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, we're going to show they keep doing it the same way. All right.
Status quo. They're right.
So let's get started with, if you go to the next slide, we're going to get started with a little bit about churches and taxes. And you got to understand a little bit about churches and what they have to do as part of the taxes. So as we all know, that churches are tax exempt. I think most all of us know that they don't pay taxes. So what is the requirements for taxes? What do they have to report? What do they have to report to the government? Where did all this come from? And initially these came from, there's kind of two acts of Congress that we can go back to. The first one's the Revenue Act of 1943. And this introduced the requirement that tax exempt organizations had to file an annual return that laid out the organization's gross income, receipts, and disbursements. So all tax exempt organizations had to start providing this information to the government. With one exemption, they exempted religious organizations from this. So from 1943 to 1969, ever since then, tax exempt organizations have had to provide it. Religious organizations have not. And it's important to keep in mind that the church is not a charitable organization. They're
Boy,
not
you
a
can
charity.
say that again. Oh,
Yes. They are a religious organization, and that puts them in a completely different place in the tax bracket than a charitable organization or any other tax exempt organization. Religion has almost free reign. You don't even have to. You don't even have to file anything with the IRS. I went through the I think it's 501c3 requirements. If you're a religion, you don't even have to file anything. Most of them do register with the government in order to let the government know we're out here, and it helps their people to be able to claim themselves as tax exempt on their taxes because you have registered with them and they recognize that you're a religious organization. But you don't have to. You don't have to report anything as a religious organization. So it's really free run. So 1969, though, they decided to look at this, and the House came up with, during the Tax Reform Act of 1969, they came up with a version that completely eliminated the religious exemption for the filing requirements. So had that gone through, all churches would have had to report on their taxes and on their finances, the same thing as the other charitable organizations. However, we all know how our legal system works. You have to pass it through the Senate as well. And the Senate's where the big money is. So they started pulling in, religion started coming in and hitting the senators up and testifying in the Senate hearings. Multiple religions sent people there to testify on their behalf. BYU President Ernest Wilkinson was sent by the LDS Church, and he went and made the argument that, hey, look, this is extremely burdensome for us as churches to have to fill out all these tax forms, when in the end, you don't get anything out of it anyway. We're still tax exempt. You're not going to get anything. This is just a big burden that you're putting on us with no benefit to the public, no benefit to the coffers of the government by doing that. To me, that was really a kind of a ridiculous argument, because Boy Scout Troop 449 has to fill out this tax paperwork, and they can do it. How can a church or a religious university that has hundreds of, maybe thousands of employees can't fill out the paperwork on this? So that was the argument that they made. The Catholics made a little bit different argument. They said, look, we shouldn't be, because we don't go out and ask the public for donations, we shouldn't have to file anything with the public. We're only asking our members to donate. So those donations are between us and our members, and the government shouldn't be at all involved in that. That's between the church and its members, and we shouldn't be involved.
Yeah.
They also argued that, why are you doing this? There's no compelling reason to force us to do this. There hasn't been a problem. We've been doing this since 1943. Nobody's taking advantage of the tax laws. Nobody's building up big treasuries or anything like that. There's no reason to do this.
The Catholic Church was saying that.
Yes.
The richest entity on the planet.
Yes.
We're not building up treasuries. We're making buildings. We're doing like the Mormons will do in 75 years. Oh.
Well, I think we have to remember the Catholics are individual dioceses. So, the dioceses themselves aren't amassing this. Maybe the central Catholic government, universal church was very wealthy, but the dioceses weren't exploding at this time. And most churches at this time weren't extremely wealthy. This was before the mega churches and that, it's all the little community churches.
Pre-Joel Osteen. They just couldn't see what it would become, right?
That's exactly right. So as usually happens, money wins out on these, and the big religions were able to persuade the Senate not to pass that, and they continued with the religious exemption. And so ever since then, religions have not had to report, and they have not had to they haven't had to say anything to the government and report things. So it's important to differentiate a few things here. So just because they're not required to report doesn't mean that they can't report. So many churches do report to their members. And the reason they do that is they find that if they're transparent with their finances, they get more donations. Their congregation.
Hold on. Excuse me. You needed to be teaching in general conference today, dude. Are you serious? I don't think the Mormons have had that revelation.
The Mormons are a special case. As I said, most churches, transparency, that people say, I see what my money's going for. I see what my church is doing with it. I see the good that's coming of it. I'll make a donation. Because most churches, you're not required to make a donation to go to your temple, to be sealed to your family, to, you're right. Going to heaven isn't based on you paying a tithing. You pay it because you want to make a donation to the church and help out. not because it's going to seal your salvation in the end.
Well, and transparency is a slippery slope. Imagine if they start on transparency with finances. What else might they have to be transparent about? We just can't go there.
I'm
Very
just
true.
saying, the woman's got a point here, man. I'm telling you. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, so most churches do, even though they don't have to report it to the government, they do report it to their constituency. And there's a big difference between reporting and transparency. You can provide a report, and that report may say absolutely nothing and be useless, as we saw today in conference. The church did report on its finances today. We have no idea how much they have. We don't know what they used it for. The report gave us nothing.
But everything is fine, brethren. Didn't you hear him say that? Don't you believe him?
And that's exactly what we learned today in conference. So transparency is different than reporting. You can give reports that are just reports, or you can give transparent reports. And so, what we're really looking for, what most people want to see, is a transparent report that you can actually make sense of, and that financial people can look at and say, oh, they are doing things correctly, or, oh, this money is being used in the way that people think that it's being used, or at least they can look at it and say, we know what the money's going for, and we can make an informed decision as to whether we're going to donate to that or not. And I think that's the key, is that informed decision of whether, if you want to give all your money to the church and they're making billions of dollars off of it, it's your money, you're free to do that. But you should have informed consent that, man, could I give this to the church and build billions, or should I give it to a charity like the Red Cross that might spend it and help refugees somewhere? You can make that choice yourself. So, okay, the next one up is, has the church ever reported then? Have they been transparent? Have they ever had to report their finances? And the answer to that is surprisingly yes, they have reported. I couldn't find a lot on what they reported during these reporting times, but they did give some report that indicated what the money was being used for, and they were giving it in a general conference type setting. They were reporting on the finances of the church. The first period was 1832 to 1838, so just after the church started. The second period of reporting was 1877 to 1883. There was some on and off reporting during Brigham Young's time period. He was not real regular on whether he did it or not, but sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. But John Taylor, once Brigham Young died, John Taylor picked it up and started doing reports. And then the last period was 1915 to 1959 that the church provided reports in conference. But as we were researching this, we started noticing something. We kept going, well, why did they stop? What was the purpose that they stopped? And why would they start reporting again? And when we started tying the report start and stop dates, we started finding that every time they stopped a report, it was because something happened that was not good for the church, or that the church did not want its members to find out about. And it seemed like when they did start to report, it was because of another reason, that they had to start reporting it to help their cause in one way or another. So you could tie the reporting to the needs of the church. If they needed it to be reported, they would. And if it hurt them to report it, they stopped reporting it.
Very self-serving then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I was thinking today in conference that they might stop reporting.
I was surprised they even let an auditor stand up myself.
Yeah.
After listening to him, of course, I wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was surprising to me too, because they basically put the auditor in a position of, he's got to basically lie right in front of everyone when they know that there was something not right with the finances.
Every flippin' one of them on that church stand knew that auditor was lying. And yet they sustain each other. I'm telling you.
I was looking for the sweat beads to start coming down.
Yeah. His eyes looked a little glazed over, like he was sort of disassociating from his body, or either heavily medicated or something. I felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
So any questions on that? If not, we'll jump into the essay itself.
No, yeah, let's go. Next slide.
let's get started. Carrie, do you want to? Yeah, next slide. If you want to go ahead and read and just read all the way through that first one. This is the actual essay. It's not that long. There's probably 5 slides or so that we're going to go through, but let's go ahead.
It's so important, though. This is awesome. Okay, so from the earliest days of the Restoration, Revelation outlined aspects of the church's mission that would require temporal means, including caring for the poor, publishing scriptures and other church materials, and building houses of worship. Joseph Smith followed Revelation as well as then current business models for financing these important endeavors. Subsequent church leaders followed the same pattern, adapting church finances to meet the changing needs of the church. Over time, the church has experienced seasons of financial distress, as well as seasons in which it was able to build reserves. Revelations in 1831 established the law of consecration and stewardship, which instructed church members to devote their property to further the Lord's work and alleviate poverty. These revelations also established the office of bishop to receive and distribute consecrated properties. Joseph Smith and other leaders also followed revelations, advising them to manage the church's mercantile and publishing activities through an entity called the United Firm.
Okay. One thing we notice in there repeated over and over again is revelation. The church finances are led by revelation. And so we're going to see that. And they start out with the very first revelation on church finance was given in 1831. Of course, the church was started in April 1830. So we're within the first year and a half that they established the law of consecration, which we all know is that we're supposed to have all property, that we're supposed to donate it all together, and it's supposed to be held in common, is basically the theory behind the law of consecration. And this was supposed to alleviate poverty. Now, think about the church in 1831 through, let's say, all the way, let's even go up to 1900. We know that the law of consecration ended long before that, but is there any point where the law of consecration ever alleviated poverty?
Well, I mean, sure.
You sound so convinced, Carrie.
In Joseph Smith's house.
Maybe in one home, yes.
In the leaders' homes. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but the church leader, the church members were absolutely poverty stricken. Most all of the members early in, there were a few more well-to-do ones than others, but for the most part, the saints were very poor throughout the majority of the first 50 years of the church. They were very much in poverty. The law of consecration never worked to relieve poverty. And we're going to see why here in a little bit, because it never was set up really to alleviate the poor. And the way it was instituted didn't help the poor. It seemed more to take advantage of the poor than to help the poor. And the key thing here that we really keyed in on was this united firm. This sounds very similar to what the church is doing today, because it said they set something up to manage the church's mercantile and publishing activities. So this is the non-ecclesiastical things that they set up this united firm for. So we said, what is this united firm? Let's look it up. So we went right to the church's website, right to, in fact, I think it's even one of these topics essays that describe what the united firm is. So let's go to the next slide and see what the united firm is. And I want to emphasize that this is directly from the church's website, this united firm. Rebecca, do you want to read that? Can you read that? It's kind of small, I know. Does that?
Yeah, it's super. I have a teeny tiny computer, so unless I printed it out ahead of time, I cannot. I'm very sorry.
I'll go ahead with it and talk through
I'll see if I can find my magnifying.
Unless I got so close that everyone could see up my nose, and that's not the look we're going for tonight. So no, let's do something else.
Well, I'll take this one and read it. So it says the United Firm was an administrative organization that oversaw the expenditure of church funds between 1832 and 1834. So this is right from the beginning, within 2 years that they started this. In March 1832, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith to establish this organization in order to coordinate the literary and mercantile establishments of the church in both Ohio and Missouri. Joseph convened a council of high priests in April 1832 in Missouri for this purpose. At the council, Joseph received another revelation. So he gets another revelation here, indicating that he, Sidney Rigdon, Newell K. Whitney, Edward Partridge, Sidney Gilbert, John Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, William W. Phelps, and Martin Harris would be part of the organization. So all the leaders are part of the organization. The revelation further explained that these men could use a portion of the collected funds for their own necessities, and any remaining funds would be used for church purposes. Wow, that's a convenient revelation that all the leaders to use this fund for their
Jesus loves the brethren. I'm just saying.
And I'm guessing that they all sustained that revelation wholeheartedly without any opposition. Well, why, yes, I'll sustain that.
However, they were responsible for the firm's debts because as the leaders, they obviously, who else would be responsible for the debts? But this was all church. This was all money that they were getting in from the church members anyway. So really the church was responsible for the debts through them. So the 9 men appointed to the United Firm each had a specific stewardship. 6 were stewards over the Revelations, which is a group that became known as the Literary Firm, and oversaw the church's publishing operations. Partridge and Whitney were the 2 bishops in the church, and Gilbert was an agent to Partridge. Together, these 3 managed church storehouses in Ohio and Missouri. In 1833, 2 additional members were added. I wonder why they added 2 additional members. Frederick G. Williams and John Johnson were added to the firm. This sounds like a Tom Cruise movie, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. The firm.
Both by revelation. Once again, revelation came. Pick these 2. Williams, a member of the church's governing presidency, had a large land holdings in Ohio, as did Johnson. Their holdings became resources of the United Firm.
So just like today,
don't start a conspiracy theory with me.
So just like today, they're sort of called based on perhaps affluence, perhaps what they can contribute.
Yeah, I don't think we see anything new in this revelation. So for 2 years, much of the church's business was done through the United Firm, including the purchase of property on which the house of the Lord in Kirtland would be constructed. When the saints were driven from Jackson County, Missouri in fall 1833, the church lost 2 vital components of the firm, Phelps' printing office and Gilbert's storehouse. In addition, the United Firm had debts from the purchase of goods for the storehouses, a new printing press in Kirtland, and land for Kirtland's development. On April 10th, 1834, members of the United Firm in Kirtland decided to dissolve the organization, and a few weeks later, the United Firm ceased to function. The Kirtland High Council, formed in February 1834, assumed the role of governing the church's mercantile and publishing efforts. Now, isn't this convenient? It was established by revelation, but how was it terminated?
By revelation, of course.
No, they took a vote. The people who paid the debts, the people who got in debt said, let's get rid of this.
Wait, we're too deep in debt. Let's get rid of this.
Exactly.
Well, that's handy. Get it? Handy.
Any opposed? No.
No opposed. Yep. It was.
And if you do oppose, see your stake president.
That's correct.
Who happens to be one of the people who owns part of this in this case. So, they basically got themselves so into debt they couldn't get out, and so they voted to terminate it, and they turned it over to the High Council of the church and said, the church now is going to assume all the debts instead of us. We were responsible for these debts. Now we're going to turn it over to the church, and they'll assume the debts. But this all came by revelation. God told us this is how it should run, but after just 2 years, they'd run up so much debt they had to get rid of it, and they voted, and it doesn't say the Kirtland was Revelation. They just seem to hand that one off, you know.
And they sure got in trouble in Kirtland, didn't they?
Kirtland was definitely a financial nightmare for them. So the last paragraph here is what was really interesting to me. I actually busted out laughing when I started reading this last paragraph. It says, in some editions of the Doctrine and Covenants, the United Firm was called the United Order. And that's not to be confused with the United Order in Utah. They used that name again. They kind of recycled it, kind of like the plastic that we're doing now with President Nelson. The United Firm was called the United Order, and code names were inserted in the place of members' names. In addition, language about the firm's purpose was changed so that it referred more generically to caring for the poor. This was done to protect the identity of the firm's members and to keep its purposes confidential. The names of the individuals were restored to the Doctrine and Covenants in the 1980s, but the word order is still used instead of firm in these other sections. So isn't that interesting? They kept the name and the purpose of the firm completely, so nobody knew who they were, and they were using names. I don't know, Rebecca, do you
I have the list. I found the list. I did. It's like they're playing D&D. I mean, there's Alim, Ahashada, Hora, Malahakalil, and these are, Edward Partridge, John Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery. It's like they're just a bunch of boys playing a game. And then, of course, people are pretty familiar with Joseph, Baruch El, and Enoch, and how do you say it? Galazam. I mean, it's like they're just playing, but they're not playing because these are lives of people and the money of people. So it's just fascinating. I would love to see a copy of the D&C pre-1980. I do not remember. I mean, I know I owned one as a kid, but I don't remember that these names are in there.
Yeah, I had one, and I remember reading those names. And then when I got the new LDS edition, I stupidly got rid of it. But
yeah,
I had
anyone
one
has one.
Yeah, I remember reading those code names. Yeah.
Yep.
But doesn't that sound exactly like what they did here? They were hiding. They hid the name of the firm. They hid the name. They didn't want anyone to know who was in charge. And we saw that in this fraud here. They were naming shell managers over the companies that didn't really exist, or the people didn't know they were over these shell companies, having them sign things that they didn't know anything about. And the reason they did it is they didn't want to be responsible for the debts, and they didn't want people to come after them. So by keeping the names, nobody could come get them for the debts of the church.
Well, you got to admit, though, I mean, come on, think this through here. The brethren of today studied the history of this, and they realized, look, that was given by revelation. We can keep doing it this way.
No doubt they followed this procedure all the way through. So, yeah, the United Firm was just one. I had not heard of the United Firm until I read until I read an essay by the church. And all of a sudden I said, what is this? And boy, that just opened my eyes as I started studying the United Firm and what its purpose was and how they used it right from the start.
That's remarkable. That's interesting. So this starts right from the very beginning, man.
Yep. 1832. They were playing these games right from the start.
Wow.
So, okay, let's go to the next one. And
righty,
Rebecca, can you read that one?
If not, I'll be happy to. Oh,
your microphone went out, Rebecca. Can you?
You're muted. Did I? Oh,
yes,
I'm. Hold it.
Everybody's muted.
Sorry,
what is this? Mormonism live?
Yeah. That was my.
You know who I'm talking about.
I'm trying to hide Rebecca.
No. Nobody puts me in a corner. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to read the second paragraph. All right. Like other churches in early America, Latter-day Saint leaders made use of financial tools such as promissory notes, bills of exchange, loans, stocks, and bonds. In 1836, in Kirtland, Ohio, church leaders established the Kirtland Safety Society. I'm sure everyone has heard of that, a banking institution funded by the purchase of stock. The purpose of this institution was to extend Latter-day Saints access to capital and to fund church objectives. Unfortunately, a financial crisis in the United States and Britain in 1837 depleted bank reserves, disrupted land sales, and led to the collapse of numerous banks, including the Kirtland Safety Society. So happening everywhere, of course, not just us, nothing we did. It's beyond our control. Two revelations in 1838 marked a change in the church's approach to funding its operations. They emphasized the importance of tithing as a means of financing the work of the church and instituted a council to oversee tithing expenditures, which became known as the Council on the Disposition of the Tithes, which sounds to me like something out of Harry Potter. I think it's just the Council on the Disposition of the Tithes. Very clandestine.
And I did hear him say that term during the audit report this month, or when he said it. I heard him say the Council of the Disposition of Tithes. So I was going, oh, it's still there.
It's still there.
It's still there. And the acronym is the Coditot, I think, something like that, because the church loves acronyms. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So couple things in this. First off, we see the sleight of hand words there. Like other churches in early America, the Latter-day Saints used financial tools such as promissory notes, bills of exchange, loan stocks, and bonds. That's true. That's true. And we're going to go over that here in just a second about how early America, how the financial system basically worked, because you did not have a central bank at this time. So you didn't have everybody using the same dollars. What you had was local banks that had reputations, and they would back up the money with gold and what was called specie, and they'd bring the money they'd give a promissory note, or the bill would be the promissory note, and then they could use that as cash, so you didn't have to haul the gold around, and then you could bring that promissory note to the bank, and you could exchange that for gold or whatever, and so it was always backed. So as the people had trust in the money, because the bank showed itself to be proper, and that they would assume that the bank was solid, people would take the risk and take the money in exchange, and that's how they did it. And the other churches did exactly the same thing. That's true.
So see, it's all legit. What are you griping about?
Absolutely legit. The one thing that was different is that the church started its own bank, the Kirtland the Kirtland Safety Society. Now, I looked, and I can't say for sure that no one else did this, but I couldn't find other churches that set up their own banks. So to make it sound like, oh, all the churches were setting up their own banks and running things this way, I just could not find any evidence that any other churches were setting up banks like this. And to take things even further, they say Kirtland Safety Society, a banking institution funded by the purchase of stock. It was not a banking institution, and we'll go into that in a few minutes. In fact, it was kind of contrary to that, because they never got a charter to start a bank, and they actually set it up and called it an anti-banking institution because they didn't have a charter and they weren't legal. So I don't know many churches that set up illegal banks during this time and started printing their own money.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here, my dear friend Landon, is you're trying to say that these guys in this new essay is carefully wording things here, just like they did with that young girl that was a few months shy of 15.
Exactly.
Is that what I'm hearing here? Okay, I just wanted to make
this sure. Is the bank that's a few months shy of 15.
A few months shy of being legal. That's what it is.
A few steps short of being illegal. Yeah, legal. All right. Interesting.
It is jailbait. Yes.
It is jailbait, not clickbait. Jailbait. Yeah, no kidding, right?
The next thing they say is that the crisis in Britain in 1837 depleted bank reserves, and we'll get into that as well. Again, not exactly true. The bank had actually collapsed. They still continued. That didn't stop them from banking, but they had actually collapsed prior to the financial crisis. It started a little later in 1837. They'd collapsed after only 2 months of operation. So It wasn't
The Kirtland Bank did. The Kirtland Bank.
Bank, yeah.
Just 2 months, huh?
Yeah, but they kept running for longer than that. But they couldn't meet their financial obligations after 2 months, and we'll go over that a little bit. And then I want to the last thing there that's highlighted in this. You see the 1838. Does that year remind you of anything?
Oh my, doesn't it ever? Holy cow!
That's our first one of the first slides. Remember when they stopped reporting the first time? 1832 to 1838. They stopped reporting in 1838, the same time as the Kirtland Safety Society failed. Joseph Smith's on the run. He doesn't have a single friend in Kirtland. He's sneaking out of the state in a wagon, trying to get to Missouri to get out of the state. He actually is arrested and charged and has to pay a fine. And they stop at that point. They stop reporting when the bank crashes. So that 1838.
Can I also add something extra? Also, just for
absolutely.
If I remember church history correctly, thanks to my dear friends RFM and Dan Vogel here in the house, 1838 was a very important year, and I think this is what caused Joseph Smith to begin rewriting his revelations and to start rewriting his own history again, too. Right?
That's probably true because he had lost all credibility.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, if we go to the next slide,
sure.
Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk. So we're going to backtrack just a little bit. In the United States, as we said, there were no central banks. There was a young, weak central government. There was a high immigration rate. So many of the people coming in didn't know how the economic system even worked when they got here. There were no central banks, as we said. So colonies issued their own currency from their own banks. So colonies might have their own banks, but you could also have a private bank, especially in a lot of the frontier towns and stuff where there wasn't a government established yet. These people would go and set up a private bank and use the promissory notes. And so
you're showing this money. These examples of the money here are different colonies.
This is actually Jackson County. So this would have been a bank that wasn't a church-owned bank. And I can't read what the other one is, Continental Bank or something.
I can't read it.
But these were some of the currencies that were being used at the time, and this is what these promissory notes look like. And you'll see when we get to the Kirtland Safety Society, they printed their own money that looked very similar. So you'd go out as a bank and you'd buy these plates, and they were fairly expensive to get the plates to produce these bills, or this, if you want to call it money, a bond, whatever you want to call these, this currency. And so that's exactly what the church intended to do when they set up the bank. So if we go on, I want to talk a little bit now. We're going to go a little into some church history here because of this local currency. It wasn't easy to counterfeit, but it was very doable to counterfeit. You might have to have a press. You had to have a press, and you had to have plates, and you had to be able to. So people would print these, and then they would take them out, and they would they'd make counterfeit dollars. So counterfeiting was very popular in the early Americas, and that's one of the reasons that we start running into it a lot in church history, is because it was popular during the time, and it was especially popular in the upstate New York area, because it was right near Canada. So you could make the counterfeit, and if you were going to get caught, you jump across the border real quick and come back. And so it was very popular in the upstate areas. And it didn't just start with Joseph Smith. That Smith family, you've probably heard of the Woodscrape group. You've heard that term before.
And New Israelites.
Yeah, that was a group that Oliver Cowdery's father was involved in. And there's evidence that Joseph Smith Sr. was also involved in it. It's not, we don't know 100%, but he seems to be involved in some way. And this was started by a man named Nathaniel Wood in Vermont. And they declared themselves modern Israelites, and they practiced this dietary code. They displayed spiritual gifts and made prophecies. They built a temple. They had plans to build a temple even.
Yeah.
They practiced polygamy. Does this sound at all familiar?
Really?
I was just counting it off. Yep. These guys are great. These are so fascinating to read about them.
So they started right early 1800s, 1800, 1802. This before, Joseph Smith is not even born yet when this happens. But this group was known to harbor counterfeiters. One of them specifically, his name was Justin Winchell. And Justin Winchell was a big, there's a lot written about him as a counterfeiter and some of the things he did early on. He shows up in Palmyra at the same time the church is getting set up again. And we start seeing some of these counterfeiters showing up at the same place that the church is going to. We start seeing these counterfeiters. And this is documented in Kathleen Melanakis's book. And I'll say, I'll be the first to admit that when you read her book, you kind of go, okay, there's this is evidence, but it's not hard evidence, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence when you start putting it together. It just starts showing up everywhere. And again, we started seeing it in books that were just church books. We were reading books from the church or that were related to the church, and counterfeiting just kept coming up. And we're going, what's going on here? Joseph Smith Sr. himself was actually involved in 2 cases involving counterfeiting. Joseph Smith Sr.
Really? Hey, I wonder, I'll bet Dan Vogel has this in his early Mormon documents.
And I was wondering if he did, and I can't see the chat, so I don't know if someone's chatting or asking questions.
Dan's here. Do you have anything like that, Dan? Do you remember? I'll ask him real quick and see if he responds.
Yeah, she notes 2 different things: Vermont State Treasurer versus Benaiah Woodward, and State of Vermont versus Benaiah Woodward. This Benaiah Woodward is both the cases. And she says in her book that Joseph Smith Sr. Was at times, we knew he was a treasure hunter. He was looking for Captain Kidd's treasure. That he also became implemented with one Jack Downing, which seems to be not a real name. So we're not exactly sure who that is.
The church never changed that, did they? He's the 13 extra, whatever the heck they were, they made
shell companies.
The company.
Yeah, but it says in her book, she documents that he turned state's evidence and escaped the penalty by basically he testified against the guy.
Yeah, Dan says yes, they're all in his first volume.
Yeah, yep.
So he has personally told me that this first volume is absolutely impossible to get, but never fear. All 5 volumes are available for free online. So just so you know, we have access to Dan Vogel's fantastic research, all 5 volumes. So
these are great things. And, sometimes it's hard to verify all of this information because it's so scattered and so old on the records. But so he was never charged, but he turned state's evidence. So he was, in order to
and that's what Dan says. There's no evidence directly for his senior, Joseph Smith Sr., for counterfeiting.
That he was actually counterfeiting, but he seems to have been involved in the case somehow, like he knew the counterfeiters and counterfeiting didn't just involve making the money. There was also distribution. So what they do is they'd make the money, and then they had like mules who would take the money and they'd take it out and distribute it and try to use it, or they buy something with it and then they'd exchange it for real currency or someone else's promissory notes and then bring it back. And that's how they'd launder this.
Oh, yeah.
So you could also be a mule as well as not necessarily the person doing the counterfeiting, but off doing it. So, according to Kathleen, he was involved in these cases, but he was never, implicated in them specifically. But if we go to the next slide, then this is where the church finances in Kirtland become kind of interesting because they formed the bank, the Kirtland Safety Society. And this came about in 1832 when Smith went to Kirtland. His power was being challenged by revelations from Oliver Cowdery and Hiram Page. Hiram Page had his own seer stone and was getting his own revelations and stuff. Yeah. And so Smith came up with this solution that let's build a temple, and we'll have special endowments and revelations that they can only get from me. And this will solidify my power. We'll bring in, everyone will start building the temple, and we'll bring all the people here. This had
and that, sorry to interrupt you,
Yep.
but that was one of the ideas that Joseph Smith told everyone who went with him on the Zion's Camp march to go retake Missouri when they got the, and that was given by revelation, gather 500 people. And then they only had like 160, and they made the 800-mile march. And then when they got there, Joseph Smith, all blustering, all that, he looked at the militia mob and he goes, "Oh, dang, I must have miscalculated. Well, come to think of it, let's have a revelation." And the Lord said, "No, don't worry about it. You don't have power yet. I will go back home." And that's when Joseph Smith had the revelation that it blamed everyone in the camp except him. Yep. John DeLynn with Mike on LDS Discussion has an absolutely awesome talk on that. But so this idea of power, Joseph Smith is still doing that here in Kirtland too. So, but that started way back in 1832 with the Zion's Camp thing. So
it's amazing how all this stuff just ties together.
And I also had a good friend of mine here call me actually just earlier this afternoon, excited to watch the show. I think he's here. Nathan Peterson, if you're here, I'll do a shout out to you, brother. He mentioned that he went to the church's website and they have a picture of this bill, but they have taken off the word anti.
Yeah. Rebecca, you've got some of that there, right?
Who doesn't just have Nauvoo bogus laying around in their living room? Everyone, right? Of course.
Pass it over.
So pass it around. Pass it around. That's right.
I mean, you're filthy rich.
I give it out at Halloween for the trick-or-treaters.
There you go. Well, I mean, isn't that amazing?
I got this from the Nauvoo Mercantile. I actually ordered it a while ago when we did a book club presentation on counterfeiting, and it is really interesting. And I gave some to Landon. I think you have some there too.
Yeah, I've got a couple of them too. And mine doesn't have the anti-banking, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, because it's just kind of handwritten after they printed it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fascinating.
Yep. How cool.
So basically they started building this temple, and remember these two guys that got added to the United firm that owned all the land. Well, they donated the land for the temple, and then the land around it, the United firm set up so people could build their houses next to the temple, and they started selling the lots. Of course, they were under the law of consecration, so all these poor immigrants coming in were supposed to be able to get houses for, basically given to them as part of the law of consecration, but instead they were sold at highly marked up rates. And so the immigrants had to go get jobs to pay for their land around the temple. And of course, the only people who had money were the non-Mormons. So they went to the non-Mormons and they'd work for them and get paid by them. So the church ended up being very land wealthy. They had a lot of land, but they had no liquid cash. They couldn't get to any cash because it was all tied up in the land, and the immigrants had to get the job and pay them the cash. So they had no way to get the cash. So they said, let's start our own bank. And so they,
that's where they went illegal then, right?
Well, they're not quite. Their intent was to be legal initially. So they decided to send off, and make their own plates. They were going to start their own bank. And so they sent off, I'm trying to think who it was they sent off to get they sent one of the apostles, Pratt or one of those, to go get the plates made. And they sent another one off to the Ohio legislature to get a charter, because in order to start a bank, you had to have a charter. And that's what made you a legal bank. Well, the one guy goes off to get the plates, and he's already got the design, what the plates are going to look like, and it's calling itself a bank at the time. So they got the plates made, and he comes back and he's successful. He gets the plates. He has the plates, not the gold plates, but just as good, because they could make.
Well, you got to distinguish that here.
These plates here are real. The angel didn't take them back.
They may have thought an angel brought them when you bring these plates that are worth money to them. But they made the plates so that they could start printing their own money. But the requested change, Orson Hyde went for the charter. That's
Orson
correct.
Hyde,
Yes, it was
that's
Orson
right.
Hyde. So Orson Hyde goes to the legislature to get the charter, and the legislature says, no, we're not giving you a charter. There's too many wildcatters and there's too much counterfeiting going on. That at this time they cracked down very tight. It was very hard to get a bank charter because of all the wildcatting and chartering that was going on. Wildcatting is where you didn't have enough money in the bank to back the bank. And so you were putting out money that really wasn't backed. And so the church, a lot of times you'll hear them say, oh, we were discriminated against. They didn't like the Mormons, and that's why we didn't get the plates. The truth of the matter is, I think like 37 charters were filed that year in Ohio to start banks, and only one was accepted. So it was very rare. You had to show that you had the capacity to run a bank, basically.
And they didn't.
And they did not.
The land, but not the cash. Yeah.
So they come back, they've got the plates, but they don't have a charter. And so what does the church do? Well, they do what they've always done. We'll just ignore the law. We don't see it. We don't care. We got God on our side. We'll ignore the law.
What's law to us?
So
That's right. If God wants a bank, God's going to get a bank. That's how it works. It's Nephi and Laban all over again. Just going to get what you want.
So they start an anti-banking bank. They call it the anti-banking bank. And it's illegal right from the start. It doesn't have a charter. They sold stock, but they never incorporated. So, they're not really a company. They printed banknotes in illegal denominations at the time because of inflation. I guess the bank you had to print them in certain denominations. They didn't want too small of denominations on it. I guess it flooded the market, made it too. So they said you had to, I can't remember if it was tens or hundreds, but you had to be at a certain level. And so the threes and the twos were not authorized at the time. So they're printing them in illegal denominations. They were only they were capitalized at $4 million for this bank, but they had a reserve of only $20,000. So they only had the gold backing of $20,000, yet they sold $4 million worth of capitalization out there.
Oh.
To put this in perspective, most banks at that time were capitalized at around $100,000, and they were capitalized at $4 million. There's stories, and again, these are stories, and I don't know what, but that Joseph Smith would bring out like boxes. They'd put them in the safe so that the customers could see them, and they'd put gold coin across the top, but it was all sand underneath it. So it looked like they had cases of gold in the safes. And there's actually, we'll get to something where they're accusing each other of doing that kind of stuff. So whether it actually happened or not, everyone's got their opinion of whether that happened or not. But the bottom line is they were accusing each other of doing that, which becomes problematic.
That's a form of counterfeiting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're trying to make everyone believe it's worth more than it did. So the bank only lasted 1 month before it announced that they would no longer give specie for the banknotes. So if you brought in a banknote, you're not getting gold or silver for it now. And so what that does is it just makes your banknote worth practically nothing. And so people come running to the bank, and there's a run on the bank basically. And the church likes to say that their enemies conspired to bring down the bank. And if you want to call, somebody that you gave a note worth something to, who's coming and trying to cash it in before it is worth nothing, your enemy, I guess you can call them that. But
so there's a twisting of the story to make it more self-promoting.
Yes, absolutely. It was the enemies that made it.
Yeah.
Not
it's
bad banking principles.
Always the anti-Mormon fault. Yeah.
Yep. So as you can see on this $3 bill, you can maybe see the little anti right in front of the banking.
Oh, I thought you was going to say you can see Joseph Smith's portrait.
Yeah, no, he didn't quite do that. I think his signature's on there. You can see his signature on there.
Close enough.
User sign.
Yeah, which they tried to say he was just a clerk in the bank. He had nothing to do with the finances of it, yet he's the one signing the money.
You can't be a clerk when you're wearing a general's costume.
No.
There's no way. You just can't.
That's crazy beans, man.
But in order to get by, they started stamping on there the anti on it, and as you said, the one listener pointed out, the one in the finance article does not have the anti stamped on it, because it's one that they hadn't stamped the anti on the picture they have, but they stamped it on there to make it, oh, we're not a bank. They had to make it clear, we're not a bank, we're an anti-bank.
We're not
like anyone even knew what that was.
That doesn't change a thing, you know.
It's basically not the reserves on tithing, but it wasn't the tithing, but the reserves on tithing. We're not a bank, we're an anti-bank. We're going to operate like one, but you don't know what the difference is.
You can always follow the brethren to the bank.
So the bank, even though the bank would no longer collect the money, they continued to issue the money. They kept issuing it. And what you do is you just go further out with the money to where people live further out that didn't know the bank was collapsing yet. And they'd say, oh, I'll take this bill. And you'd sell them. They'd sell you horses. You'd go sell the horses and get some from a bank and get notes that were real. And then you had real money, and their money was basically useless that they took the promissory note on. And there's again, this is where there's claims that the brethren actually sent out people, apostles and other people to go do the money and get as much as they could out of it before it became completely useless to them. And to try to,
why they have enemies that are persecuting them?
This is exactly why they have enemies that are persecuting.
No wonder I never learned this in Sunday school.
Yeah.
Hey, I never heard this until, and this shows you how lousy I am with church history, until I saw your guys' podcast, because I was emphasizing, my intellect into the book of Abraham stuff and the papyri. So I wasn't real good with church history. So this is one of the reasons why I said, man, I want these guys to share this information, because you can see how the church literally takes the history and twists it to turn it into a faith promoting. Oh, we were persecuted. Why? I was told to teach on my mission. They were persecuted because Revelation was teaching Joseph Smith the truth. God and Jesus had bodies. Salvation was through the Mormon church, etc. That has nothing to do with what was happening. Nothing.
They were defrauding a tri-state area, so people are bound to be a little cranky about that.
Yeah, they're doing this, and they're taking over. They're voting as a big block, and they're taking over government and then
Joseph Smith made it impossible to extradite him out of Nauvoo with the habeas corpus. He always threw out habeas corpus to everybody. Yeah. It's no wonder people did not like him. Holy cow.
Yeah, and it gets worse even. So if we go the next slide.
Well, here's what Dan Vogel says real quick, and then we'll go. They made contracts with agents to sell bills that didn't have anti on, or on the contract to sell them.
Oh, so they were selling them without the anti.
Yeah. And then that way it's banknotes, and that's how they were getting away with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Good to have men like Dan on.
Oh, I love it when Dan.
It makes you nervous and then glad at the same time, right?
Well, yeah. Dan's a good. He's nothing. He's the real gold.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's
Don't
the gold
tell him
standard.
I said that. I've got to have him on some shows in the future. I don't want him to be arrogant. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Dan. That's good information. Appreciate that.
So Smith and Rigdon have to get out of town when the bank collapses. It did run for a couple more months. I think it ran like 11 months total. And then 1837, there was that financial crash. Everything came down on top of, not only was their stuff fraudulent, but a bunch of other banks crashed, but people went after him. Nothing like losing all your money to make you lose your faith. And so it said he didn't have two friends in Kirtland by the time the Kirtland Safety Society failure was over. So he had to get out of town, but they did arrest them and charge them, and they were convicted and fined $1,000 each for their part in the bank finance thing.
Hey, whoa. We actually do know that conviction held, and they were fined. They were fined.
Yeah, that's what I found, is they were convicted and had to pay $1,000
I was told
fine.
Joseph Smith was taken to charged several dozen times, and nothing ever. He was never found guilty on any of the charges. He was 100% innocent. That was the narrative I was raised on.
Yeah, and in Kathy's book, it says that they were convicted and fined $1,000 each. So,
Wow.
yeah, of course, we were also told that they weren't ever fined that he was never, found guilty in the Peepstone trial either, and stuff. So
1826, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that this is, a lot of these aren't. They may not be. They're more civil penalties than they are criminal penalties. Because they let him go after they paid the $1,000 fine, which is amazing that the bank was bankrupt, but they still had the $1,000 to pay the fine.
Yeah, right. How'd they get that? Yeah.
I think they asked for members to help out.
Or they did the same thing with the papyri. Hey, I want this papyri, but I can't buy it, so you guys buy it.
So
sort of the bail out the prophet. Is that what it was? Like the primary song, right? Not follow, but bail out.
Bail out the prophet. Yeah.
Bail out the prophet. Bail out the prophet. Bail out the prophet. He's in jail.
So Oliver Cowdery got away. He got to Missouri. But this is where we started seeing a lot of the counterfeiting come up, because Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated, and he was excommunicated on 7 charges. One of them was being a lawyer. One of them was claiming Joseph Smith committed adultery with Fanny Alger. But another one was for counterfeiting, was one of the charges. And we were going,
really?
Counterfeiting? Why are they charging this guy with counterfeiting?
You don't hear that in church.
So the Danite, this is the time they formed the Danite secret society, and they're
sacred, not secret.
A sacred organization called the Danites, and the Danites created a Danite manifesto. And in there, this is from the first presidency. They wrote specific descriptions of the counterfeiting that they claimed Oliver Cowdery and some of the other brethren were engaged in. And they wrote this in this Danite manifesto. So this isn't the mob. This isn't the government making these claims. This is Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon making this claim. And they said, and they intended to publish this to the world. And so they accused Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer. We got two of the witnesses there, and Lyman E. Johnson. And they said they united with a gang of counterfeiters, thieves, liars, and blacklegs of the deepest dye to deceive, cheat, and defraud the saints out of their property by every art and stratagem which wickedness could invent. You kept up a continual correspondence with your gang of marauders in Kirtland, encouraging them to go on with their iniquity. Stealing, cheating, lying, instituting vexatious lawsuits, selling bogus money. Bogus money is counterfeit. And also stones and sand for bogus. This is the claim that they had the sand with the, and that they'd cover it up and make it look like it was counterfeit money or that it was real money. In which nefarious business Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Lyman E. Johnson were engaged while you were there. You are at this time engaged with a gang of counterfeiters, coiners, and blacklegs, as some of those characters have lately visited our city from Kirtland and told what they had come for. So you've got Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith saying Oliver and David Whitmer and Lyman Johnson, you guys are involved in counterfeiting. We know it. These guys told us. We know that you're involved with this. You stole from the saints. Wow. And they're charging them and excommunicating them for counterfeiting.
Hey, is this in the Joseph Smith papers? It'd have to be, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I don't know if it's in there. It's in the Danite Manifesto.
Church Finance 1837. I may have to go look at I'll bet it is. It's got to be if it was written by Joseph Smith.
Yeah, and if you look up Oliver Cowdery's excommunication, you can see some, the reasons that they claimed that he was.
I knew it was involving Fanny Alger, but I didn't know it was counterfeit. I didn't know that they were accusing Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer and all the holy cow. Don't join Joseph Smith. He'll turn on you instantly, man.
Well, that's kind of what we found. We started looking at charges throughout the entire time. Counterfeiting was always one of the charges. It was always the common ones that we know of, but then tagged on counterfeiting every time. It was so curious. That's kind of what made us interested in looking at more. Yeah.
I'm in my 60s, man. I've never heard of this.
Yeah. It's an amazing story. And the bottom line is, you can say all the evidence was circumstantial. Were they counterfeiting? Were they not counterfeiting?
Right.
Doesn't matter. They're accusing each other because,
Yeah.
Oliver Cowdery's going back saying, no, you guys were counterfeiting. We weren't counterfeiting.
Good
You guys were
point.
counterfeiting.
Good point.
You're
we're
a
gonna see that
counterfeiter,
it
and
comes
you're a
up-
counterfeiter.
Yeah, you're a counterfeiter. You're a counterfeiter. And
Like
it comes up
Oprah,
over
right?
and
And
over
you're
and
a
over again.
counterfeiter.
So one way or the other, even if none of them were counterfeiting, they're all charging each other as counterfeiting. And so you're going, these are supposed to be the guys I'm supposed to believe on the three witnesses. And yet Joseph Smith himself is saying they're liars, counters, thieves, and bootleggers, but
Yeah.
I'm supposed to believe them on their testimony of the three witnesses.
Yeah, on their experience.
So, and I'm going to skip some of these others. Because,
wasn't just real quick, and wasn't David Whitmer, wasn't he one of them that said Joseph was a fallen prophet? I think he was, wasn't he? Dan Vogel, do you remember which one of those? They were, I know it was William McClellan was one of them for sure, but there were a group of them who were saying, well, Joseph Smith is a fallen prophet.
I can't keep track because they'd say it and then they'd retract it and then they'd say it.
I know, right?
Well,
he's accusing them.
reinstated.
Yeah. If he accuses them, then they're going to write back at you. You're a fallen prophet. So it was sort of a back and forth.
Yeah. Good point.
So we're going to visit the counterfeiting is not over yet. We're going to revisit it when we get to the Nauvoo period because it comes up again. Oliver gets excommunicated. David Whitmer leaves. They get kicked out of Missouri and they go back to Nauvoo, and it all shows up again. It doesn't go away. It follows them. So
it's the plague, man.
It is. It's the plague of early Mormonism that none of us really know anything about. So let's go to the next essay then, the next part of the essay.
You bet. You want me to read it?
Yeah, if you could read that.
Sure. Beginning in 1841, Joseph Smith transacted business on behalf of the church as trustee in trust, or the person legally responsible for the church's assets. This was a common organizing model for many churches and other institutions at the time, in bold, for those who are going to hear this as a podcast. After Joseph Smith's death, church members sustained the Quorum of the 12 Apostles to dictate about the finances of the church until the first presidency could be reorganized. During the remainder of the 19th century, the trustee in trust acted in concert with church councils to acquire property and transact other business on behalf of the church, invest in building Latter-day Saint communities, and fund the gathering of saints to the North American West. For example, the church helped facilitate Latter-day Saint migration to the North American West by extending loans through the church's perpetual emigrating fund, that's in bold. In 1877, in an effort to ensure careful and consistent accounting, President John Taylor organized an auditing committee that renewed all transactions conducted under the trustee in trust.
Okay, so several things here, and I probably missed a couple highlights here. We have quite a about a 40-year jump right here between 1841 to 77, I guess 30 something years jump. But again, we find one of these sleight of hand words. This was a common organizing model for many churches and other institutions at the time. Okay, I can believe that the trust and trustee was maybe used by some small churches. I believe that trust and trustee would be used by a business to set up a business. But for one man to own all of the property of a church, of a town, to be its mayor, to be its church ecclesiastical leader, to own the property, the printing press, I can't name any other place where one trust and trustee owns every single part of a community in any other church that I can think of. So the model of a trust of trustees, a trustee in trust, yes, I'm sure that was used. It was never used to this level that Joseph Smith used it as in Nauvoo. He controlled everything. He owned everything. We know he was giving properties to the wives, all of his different wives. He would just give property to, because he was holding all of that as trust, and he was giving it to everybody like it was his, not the church's. And
well, he was secretly made a king in Nauvoo.
He was the king.
And the crazy thing is, however, though, according to this Joseph Smith papers on the organizations, the records, not only Joseph Smith, but it was like Brigham Young and John Taylor. And John Taylor actually, after they had gotten into Salt Lake and after Brigham Young was dead, John Taylor pursued that, hey, I'm a king thing somewhat, but he had to go into hiding. So, yeah, we're talking total dictator here. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or make this into a mudslinging contest. That's dictatorial power. That's Putin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I highlighted some of these. After Joseph Smith's death, look who they give it to. The Quorum of the 12 Apostles, to dictate about the finances of the church. I like the word dictate because that's pretty much what it was.
Dictate. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
But we're going to see how wise of an option that was to give it to the, to give it those finances to them as well. A couple other things that were highlighted in here: extending loans through the Church Perpetual Immigrating Fund. Anyone who's read the history, that was very useful fund for those who were emigrating from Europe and coming over, where they could borrow it and then they had to pay it back. The problem is, if you got over here and you decide to leave the church, you lost everything. It was almost like indentured servitude. Before you could leave Utah, if you decide you were going to leave the church, they would take everything you owned to pay back your loan for the immigration fund, and you were left basically without a dime. So they used it to control you in one essence, because they now owned you when you got there.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, exactly. They found a way. And then again, 1877, that's one of those. Remember, 1877, John Taylor now starts disclosing the finances again. When Brigham Young dies, he starts implementing it. So, but I want to go back to Joseph Smith up until he dies in Nauvoo, and then we'll jump to these to the other saints. So if you can go to the next slide, Nauvoo counterfeiting. I said we'd get to this. Once they got to Nauvoo, it turns out, and this comes from a book. This is not a LDS guy, David R. Johnson, in his book Illegal Tender: Counterfeiting in the Secret Service in the 19th Century America.
Well, good. We can trust him now.
Yeah, he said that St. Louis and Nauvoo, Illinois combined to create the second major production center in the nation, and he's talking about for counterfeit money. So Nauvoo, Illinois was the second production center in the nation for counterfeiting, according to the Secret Service during this time. Again, counterfeiting shows up. Professor Stephen Mim included in Profile of Nauvoo in his study. He says counterfeiters associated with the Mormon settlement at Nauvoo, Illinois, for example, attracted condemnation from their neighbors in the 1840s. The Mormons, who had established an autonomous state within a state at Nauvoo, probably tolerated counterfeiters in their midst, and may well have had a hand in manufacturing bogus coin themselves. The attraction of high autonomous Nauvoo was understandable. Moreover, the Mormons had been accused of counterfeiting in the past, as well as other experiments that bordered on counterfeiting, including the Kirtland Bank debacle. And then the last one is from the Warsaw Signal, and it says counterfeits. There is a species of counterfeit extensively circulated in this community called Nauvoo bogus. They are half dollars dated 1828. They are a pretty good imitation of the genuine coin, so good that some of our businessmen have been imposed upon by them. It is said they are manufactured in the City of the Saints. So they had their own counterfeit name, the Nauvoo bogus, that was being put out.
Nauvoo bogus. That would have been a good newspaper name.
That's for sure.
That was rude. True, but rude.
but you look at this. This is Nauvoo. Joseph knew everything that was going on in Nauvoo. Nothing happened in Nauvoo that Joseph or the leaders did not know about. It was not that big of a city. So for this to be going on during that time is a good indication they knew something. And even if they weren't doing it, they were the ones, that were allowing it to happen, and then letting the people come back into their autonomous state and say, no, we're not.
Yeah, I want to show you guys this. This is the Joseph Smith papers, the administrative records of the Council of 50 Minutes, and this is March 1844 to January 1846. I'm not kidding. The whole thing. There is
Look at those tabs. Oh my God. Our copy is like very pristine. It's for decorations purpose only.
40 pages of meeting after meeting after meeting. I mean, they did nothing else. They didn't even sleep, eat, nothing. They always had these meetings. So you're right. Joseph, he was using all of the brethren. They were his eyes and ears all around. He knew everything. He had a whole army of people that was constantly reporting to him in these councils. So,
oh yeah,
just to let you know, that is in Joseph Smith papers. Landon is not just making this up. He's not trying to besmirch Joseph Smith by saying this guy knew everything and he wanted total control. We've got the evidence that is. I mean, I personally can't imagine it, but I'm serious. From 6 a.m. to midnight, these guys were constant, and what they were doing is going from place to place so that they never got caught.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this wasn't just sitting down in one place for 14 hours a day. They were constantly on, 2 or 3 at a time would go over there, and then 2 or 3 would leave out, go around. And Dan Vogel's new book is in print right now, and it's going to be on this period. It'll be out hopefully before the middle of May. So we're going to have yet another new analysis coming out. I want to plug his book, so that'll be fun when he gets his book done. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
But no problem.
No, that's amazing.
So if we go to the next slide, we come back to Joseph Smith. We all know what happened with the Nauvoo expositor, that they published their first edition and Joseph Smith ordered it destroyed. Well, he had to, we know it's because he exposed his polygamy. It was William Law, remember, the first counselor in the first presidency, who leaves and exposes the polygamy.
Yeah, now we're talking the equivalent of Dallin Oaks.
Yes.
Let's give this context. Look, that's really for real.
and so he has to explain this burning of the press to the governor when all of this, violence starts happening. And here's what he writes. He says, Smith says dissenters were unprincipled, lawless, debauchees, counterfeiters, bogus makers, gamblers, and peace disturbers. He's trying to make it sound like William Law is using his press to print counterfeit money. Again, the counterfeiting comes up. So what happens is Governor Ford, after he's arrested, Governor Ford's coming to Nauvoo to find out what's happening. He's going to do an investigation. And what happens? John Taylor hides the stereotype plates, and what he claims are the most valuable things were removed from the printing office in Nauvoo, and he disguised himself so as not to be known and crossed the river to escape to Canada when word came that Governor Ford was coming to Nauvoo to investigate. So if you're just printing a newspaper in the church printing office or Books of Mormons, why do you have to hide the stereotype plates? Why do you have to disguise yourself and escape to Canada?
That's interesting.
Who's counterfeiting? I don't know. We don't have any direct evidence, but here they are throwing it around.
Why would they act that way? Yeah.
Why are you acting that way? And so Governor Ford gets there and he meets the Nauvoo General George Miller, and he charges him with stolen goods. And he says, stolen property has been traced to your city, and the owners who came to search were ordered away and fled for their lives. And there were those in Nauvoo that carry on a pretty large business in stealing. Ford said he suspected murders had been ordered by some of the Mormon leaders. He strongly threatened that if the depredation did not cease, the surrounding counties will take up the guard and you may be driven despite the state in the dead of winter. So again, they seem to be almost running a criminal enterprise in Nauvoo of this counterfeiting and these stolen goods, because it was an autonomous state within a state that the other surrounding communities couldn't come into because they had the Nauvoo charter, which made them autonomous. So it was the perfect place to run this almost criminal activity. And counterfeiting was clearly happening in this city from somebody at some quarter.
Rebecca, you weren't told any of this when you were being raised, were you? The faith promoting story for me was truly, seriously. Everywhere the saints go, they were persecuted by the mobs, and Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered, and he was just simply trying to build temples to do the Lord's work, and he was taking care of his people. That's what I heard.
Yeah, it was all based on religious beliefs and the persecution of the saints and those that believed. Exactly. You never knew. It never entered your mind that what might the saints have been doing that might have pissed some of these people off. Oh my gosh. But as soon as you start reading and going to original sources, it becomes very clear that there's something different going on than what you were told. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, all right. I'm in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. We have 3 professor witnesses right here on this.
Professional professors. That's who we are.
Well, and like I said, we gathered this information from various sources, and you know, we can always be wrong. We say that. We encourage everyone to go out and study this and find these things and look them up themselves and see what they think. You know, this was just information we were finding that we were able to compile together in these different books. But in fact, if we go to the next slide, this is one that was really interesting that none of us really think about. But we've all seen this picture of the saints leaving Nauvoo in the middle of the winter and crossing over the river.
Very faith promoting. It was the miracle that the Lord froze the river so that they could cross over.
They crossed, and then they all froze to death on the other side. The children froze and everything because they had to leave before the mobs destroyed them. Well, the reality is they didn't leave because of the mobs. They left because federal troops were coming. Federal troops were coming with arrest warrants for Brigham Young and John Taylor for counterfeiting.
No way.
So they'd actually tried to arrest them a couple times in Nauvoo, but you know, they were always able to be disguised or swept out of the city and stuff. And so they knew that they might possibly be arrested prior to the end of winter. And so they said, we got to get out of the United States before we get arrested for this. And they started the Exodus. And again, we go back to people charging each other. William Smith, who is Joseph Smith's younger brother, who was also the patriarch, who you could write whole stories about this guy. He's a dirtbag all the way around, but he's the patriarch of the church. And he said of the Brigham Young and the 12 that they were thieves, murderers, and counterfeiters. This is Joseph Smith's brother and the patriarch of the church. So this isn't the mob saying this. This is you know, these guys. So a grand jury indicted Brigham Young and many of the quorum of the 12 on counterfeiting. And by order of abandonment of Nauvoo, prior to the federal troops arriving, Brigham Young ordered the saints to leave Nauvoo in the middle of the winter to avoid the grand jury indictment that was coming for counterfeiting. So,
wow.
Again, this is all information that was in Kathleen's book, you know, with the things that were in there. So
that's definitely a new look on that. Holy Toledo. All I ever heard was about the glorious miracle of the Lord freezing the river over so that the saints could escape their enemies. And I guess technically federal marshals coming to bust your butt for counterfeiting would make them your enemy.
I was going to say, Rebecca always has a story about all the faith promoting stories of, you know, the women hiding Joseph in their beds so that, they, you know, how faith promoting those are.
There's always another spin to those, you know, when you really start to look.
Yeah. Okay, they're going to catch me in your bed, Patty. I got to go over here to
That's right. Hide the prophet. That's it. That's always an inspiring story. My family had to hide the prophet. I actually did start noticing those stories. I spent decades in primary, and a lot of times the kids would get up and give talks about family members who, pioneer era had to hide the prophet. And being in primary every Sunday, I started thinking, this is very interesting. I wonder if other churches have historical leaders where they're constantly having to hide them under the bed or in the closet, violent stories. And yeah, a lot. So I don't know. It says something. Big picture.
Richard Bushman might have been very right when he said the dominant church narrative just isn't true. I know people don't like him for that, but I mean, wow, this is not
it was realistic, I think. Yeah.
So the key,
you guys.
The key thing here is the counterfeiting charges didn't end once they got to Utah. If you want to go to the next slide.
Are you kidding me? Serious?
But
Young
wait, there's more.
He set up a mint as soon as they got to Utah, making coins brought back from the California gold fields. Now, the fact that he set up a mint tells me they probably had some way to make coins, machine or some way to make coins. Maybe they brought it from Nauvoo. I don't know where they got it. But citizens received a rude shock when assay tests showed that Mormon coins were debased by as much as 20%. So they were gold coins, but they lacked 20% of the gold that was required to make them worth the amount that they were saying that they were worth. So they were under another way of counterfeiting. You're giving them 80 cents for $1 is basically what you're doing by doing that. Also, in order, when the Utah War broke out, Brigham Young planned to put $500,000 in forged checks in circulation. It was discovered, and officials at Camp Floyd attempted to arrest him. However, complete political control of the legal system by Brigham Young made this impossible. Former Mormon Myron Brewer, who turned state's evidence during a preliminary hearing, was shot dead in the middle of the night. So, there's
Cordy Rockwell, maybe.
Yeah. Could
Bill Hickman. Yeah,
he had plenty of people who would take care of that. And this one's from Will Bagley. Anyone who's read Will Bagley and knows his work, he says the persistence of such charges of counterfeiting in Illinois, Iowa, New York, California, and ultimately in Utah territory suggests that counterfeiting, like polygamy, was a publicly condemned but secretly sanctioned activity in early Mormon society.
Yeah. Yeah, that is wow, what an eye opener. Yeah.
So the last part of that sentence that we had was, about they turned it over to the 12 apostles and the first presidency. So the next slide, we decided that we'd do a little bit of a, FBI's most wanted and say, who are these people who are running the church finances during this time?
Oh my gosh. Look at this.
And what were they charged with? And I want to point out, these weren't necessarily legal charges. Some of them were legal charges that they faced, but these were also charges that they were making against each other. So it's really hard to make a differentiation when, Joseph Smith is the mayor of Nauvoo and he's saying that you're counterfeiting. Is that a civil charge? Is that what kind of charge is that? But the reason I put it, whether it was a legal charge or a charge made by some other ecclesiastical leader, was to point out the problem that no matter what happens, whether it's a legal claim or a claim by an ecclesiastical leader, something's wrong here because everyone's accusing everyone else of counterfeiting of all of these different charges. Now, some of these are going to be bigamy, which we all know they were practicing, although they weren't claiming it. So some of these guys were being charged with this, or they were being pursued for bigamy under the Edmund Tucker Act, John Taylor, and that kind of stuff. So these were legal things, but most of the counterfeiting ones were legal. They were, grand jury found something or something like that. So Joseph Smith,
Harley P. Pratt, Orson Hyde. Oh,
my favorite's William Smith there, where he was accused of stealing and ruining virtuous females by the wholesale.
Ruining virtuous females by the wholesale.
Oh my hell!
That was Joseph Smith's brother and patriarch of the church.
Holy cow!
But
Oh
you look at
my.
this, these guys were all charging each other with counterfeiting. The grand juries were finding they were counterfeiting. Porter Rockwell, heck, we can't prove the murders, but they say he committed 100 plus murders and
Right.
attempted murder of Boggs. He was accused of. He wasn't charged with that. His family went back to the wood scrape group. His family was part of the wood scrape group. So this counterfeiting culture was in many of the families. That counterfeiting culture went all the way back to the wood scrape group, and they keep showing up in all of these places. So again, you look at these different charges against these different people, and you just go, wow, these are the people who are in charge of the church's finances.
I'm just shocked
at this time.
Wow.
Do you need to read the charges, Landon, for those that are just listeners?
Sure,
I wonder if you should quickly do that because it's so comprehensive.
Yeah, so the first one we have Joseph Smith, and he was charged with treason, bigamy, fraud, treasure digging, inciting a riot, damaging property, attempted murder, extortion, and illegal banking. These are either charges or accusations against him. Brigham Young, counterfeiting, murder, and bigamy. So they tried to get Brigham Young on the Mount Meadow massacre, but he completely controlled the Utah, everything in Utah, and there was no way they were ever going to convict him of that. John Taylor, counterfeiting. We just saw he ran away with the dyes and stuff. So he was involved with several of the counterfeiting charges. He had the same grand jury that Brigham Young had for counterfeiting and had federal agents coming after him. He was also bigamy. He was charged with that, and they tried to arrest John Taylor for that. Parley P. Pratt was involved in the counterfeiting. He was also charged with treason. Murder. We know he. I'm trying to remember who it was he killed. I think it was in England before he ever came over. I think he was charged in England with murder, or there was some story of a murder he committed in England before he came over to the United States. And he also was involved with bigamy. Orson Hyde was counterfeiting. He's the one that went and got the plates, and also receiving stolen goods. Porter Rockwell, murder times 100-ish, attempted murder of Governor Boggs, which was never pinned on him. Counterfeiting, he was involved with that. William Smith, the prophet's brother, counterfeiting, known for drinking, fighting, horse and cattle stealing, and ruining virtuous females by the wholesale. These were the charges that were put against him by the Quorum of the 12. Somehow that's the guy they put in charge as the patriarch.
I love that description. That is too good. Ruining women, virtuous females by the wholesale.
Seems to be a family business, I think.
Oh, for hell's sake. That is so disgusting.
Heber C. Kimball was involved in the counterfeiting and also bigamy. Oliver Cowdery was accused of counterfeiting, stealing, cheating, lying, insinuating vexatious and nefarious business. That was by Joseph Smith that made that claim against him. So, and then Sidney Rigdon actually seemed to be the cleanest of all of them. He was only really caught up in the illegal banking, that he had to pay that fine for the Kirtland Safety Society.
It would be interesting to draw lines from whom is accusing whom, because they're all pointing the fingers at each other. It would be interesting
and it shifted. Yeah, it shifted.
And it shifted back and forth. That's what I mean. It's very twisted.
As the churches did. And we'll come back to one like this that's kind of fun here at the end. To see how that's changed or if that's changed over time. So we're only halfway done. I know we're kind of over your normal.
No, we're doing good. You want to go to the next slide? Yeah, part two.
Part two. So
we're doing good.
Okay, Rebecca, that one's a little small, but can you read that? You have
I have it printed out.
Okay.
So I already know that I'm old and have bad vision. So I print things out in really large fonts. So that's what I do. Don't make fun of me. Okay. Anti-polygamy laws enacted by the United States government in the 1880s targeted church finances, eventually disenfranchising the church and confiscating its funds and properties. Fluctuating markets and poor investments further depleted the church's remaining resources, presenting church presidents Wilfred Woodruff and Lorenzo Snow with significant debts. After the 1890 manifesto, President Woodruff worked with lawmakers and court officials to recover church property and transition many church-affiliated enterprises into private businesses, a process his successors continued. In 1899, President Snow called on Latter-day Saints to increase their commitment to tithing contributions, which in time helped return the church to financial solvency. Early in the 20th century, Church President Heber J. Grant and presiding Bishop Charles Nibley, who worked previously as businessmen, incorporated church operations formerly administered solely by the trustee under 3 entities. In 1916, the Corporation of the Presiding Bishop was created to manage donations and expenditures for works of charity and for public worship, including local meeting houses. In 1923, President Grant established the Corporation of the President, which oversaw all other church assets used for religious purposes. He also founded the Zion Securities Corporation to manage remaining taxable and non-ecclesiastical entities and properties. During this period, Bishop Nibley worked to bring church financial records in line with modern accounting standards. As the church's financial situation improved, church leaders began to supply up to 50% of the costs of building local meeting houses, leaving the remainder to local budgets. Financial policies implemented by President Grant remained largely intact until the 1960s.
Okay, so the highlighted section there, after the 1890 manifesto, President Woodruff worked with lawmakers and court officials to recover church property and transition many church-affiliated enterprises into private business. A process his successor continued. We all remember during the polygamy times, the church was getting raided. All their property was getting turned over. They were losing it. They had to come out with something, and they came out with this 1890 manifesto saying we will no longer practice polygamy if you'll give us all our property back, is basically the deal that was made.
Right.
We all know they didn't stop practicing polygamy in 1890.
Right.
They sent a manifesto out.
And this is clearly talked about in this fabulous book here that you guys and myself are going to go through. The essays. There is an essay on polygamy post 1890 where the church came clean in this essay in 2014 or 15, and in the process they hid more than they revealed, so it's still the same old. We'll talk about that in detail too. So
yeah,
just keeping the audience informed. There's a whole lot more good history with these two fabulous people. So
and the point I wanted to make on this is that we heard this very similar thing. They worked with lawmakers and court officials to recover the property. Like, oh, we cooperated fully with officials to make sure everything. We heard the same thing with the SEC. They said, oh, as soon as we became aware of the shell companies, we worked closely with the SEC to resolve the issue. And you've been caught. That's why you.
Right. You lied and you got caught. That's how it works.
I like the phrase modern accounting practices.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, right.
We know what those look like now.
Boy, we sure do. Oh, man.
But they lied. They continued to ignore the law. This is a thing we just kept seeing. Every time it came to finances, they would lie to the government, whatever they had to do to keep their finances. And it got them in trouble time after time after time. They would lie to the government.
Profit after profit after profit.
After profit. It never ended.
Profit after profit.
Yep.
You're not exaggerating when you say that.
No.
This is one of the items that just blew my mind. I'm just going, wow, does this ever end? No, it really doesn't. It's just.
And was converting all of this church property to private businesses a process that his successor continued? What was the purpose of that? It would seem to me that would be to get it out of the church's name, because they hadn't stopped polygamy, so that they couldn't seize the property again because it no longer belonged to the church.
There you go. Yeah.
So they're working with the government to move to get their property back and move it into a private hand so that they couldn't take it again. Meanwhile, they're not stopping polygamy, and it was the 1903 or whatever it was before the second manifesto came out. I can't remember the year. It was
Yeah.
19
And then a
something.
third one had to be put out in
Yeah.
1918, I believe. Yeah. So you're
So-
talking 25 years later.
Probably one of the most delightful things I found while I was researching this was this. It says in the 20th century, church president Heber J. Grant and presiding Bishop Charles Nibley, who previously worked as businessmen, were brought in as to basically save the church, to get the church back into financial prosperity. So I did a little bit of research on Heber J. Grant and Charles Nibley, and they show up in a surprising way I'd never heard of before. It really surprised me as I came to that. If we go to the next slide, we talked about polygamy. The church promised to end polygamy, but it continued until 1904. 1904, including the first presidency, was still marrying people during this time, just doing it secretly. And up to this time, Wilford Woodruff was the president of that. And so we're going to go to the next one, and I just want you to remember those names: Heber J. Grant, Charles Nibley, because those are going to become important again. We're going to go back to those. So let's see, is it
Carrie's turn?
Carrie's turn to read?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll be happy to. Between 1915 and 1959, annual reports of the church's income and expenditures were announced in general conference. These reports showed that most funds were directed toward estate buildings, headquarters, office buildings, church, schools, missions, and welfare. After 1959, auditors presented in general conference only the results of an annual general audit, assuring the public that leaders had followed financially responsible procedures and dealt honestly in their use of church funds. Deficit spending on the church's ambitious international program of constructing ward and stake buildings during the 1880s drained the church's accounts. N. Eldon Tanner, formerly a business professional, was called to the first presidency in 1963 and introduced strict budgetary controls on church operations. He outlined a financial plan that encouraged building a surplus, maintaining a strict budget, and spending from reserves. Within a short period, the church was able to meet its operational budget and pay its debts. Gosh, where was the prophet in all of this? Wasn't he the one supposed to be? Isn't Jesus running his show? Sorry, that's not in this. Okay, this
Eldon Tanner was better than Jesus. He actually got him out.
And it was profit,
Jesus
not profit. There's a difference.
Yeah, no kid, right? Depends how you spell it.
Depends how you spell it.
We're having way too much fun. This improved financial condition allowed the church to more effectively support many aspects of its mission. For example, since the early 1800s, local wards and stakes had operated their budgets through a mixture of local donations and tithing funds. In 1990, the Council of the Disposition of the Tithes announced that all operating expenses of local units would be paid from general tithing funds. The following year, a consolidated missionary fund allowed the monthly expenses of full-time missionary service to be equalized across missions.
Yeah, and I'm going to go the last paragraph first, because I think that last paragraph, I really think that was something good that the church did. I don't know how many of you remember when that happened, but before that, if you got called to Japan on a mission, you had to pay like $1,000, whereas the kid that went to Guatemala paid $100 to go. And so all the rich kids went to the rich countries. The poor kids all went to the poor countries. There was no equalization. And some families would get two kids called to Japan, and they had to come up with $2,000 on top of their tithing to make that. So when they equalized that and started paying the chapels, the wards didn't have to pay a budget. I thought that was really a good thing. That is one of the good things in the finance essay that I agree was a good thing, that I think was fair, and that actually came out of this that was good. I do want to go back up to that top paragraph, though. the areas we highlighted, we said between 1915 and 1959, those were the two. That was where they started reporting again, as we at the beginning of the show. 1915, 1959 is when they stopped reporting.
How interesting.
Two things happened there. 1915, Joseph F. Smith was the president of the church, and his name started getting dragged through the mud due to financial problems with the church, and the church interloping its money with private businesses. And so in order to try to avoid that, they started reporting again on the finances of the church. So there was a reason that they finally started to report again. And then we see in 1959, the church got itself in a lot of debt. They started building too many buildings, too many projects around the world. They got into a lot of debt, and they had to bring in N. Eldon Tanner to clean it up. And at the time, they didn't want everyone to know how big a debt they were in. So they stopped reporting in Sacrament, and they went to this general statement that we heard today. And they've been doing that.
So that really locks in perfectly what you were finding. That's good historical detective work, you guys. That's awesome. I love it.
So the fun thing is 1915. What happened in 1915? You actually have to go back.
World War One.
It was before World War I, but it was coming. It was coming. But this goes back to something I had no idea about. It's called the Utah-Idaho Sugar Company antitrust investigation. Basically, Utah started trying to produce sugar right from very early on. Brigham Young asked John Taylor to try to figure out how to produce sugar when he was on a mission in France. And John Taylor, I didn't know that you could do this as a missionary. He ended up buying a bunch of stuff, shipped it back, and started a company while he was on his mission, shipped all this sugar producing stuff back to the States. He didn't have enough money to get it there, so the church had to pay the money to get it the rest of the way there. And they brought it into Salt Lake, and that's Sugar House and all that started, where they tried to produce sugar. And they tried several different methods to produce sugar because they're an inland area. Sugar is coming in from, Cuba and that kind of places where it's produced at. But they said, well, if we could produce it here locally, that would make it a lot cheaper. And so they tried. There was sugar beets was a thing that they said, oh, we can extract sugar from, but no one had figured out how to do it yet. And this guy in France had started figuring out how to do it. And so they bought all that equipment and brought it over, but they couldn't get it all here. And some of the pieces they left behind were important pieces for making it, and they never could get it to work. And Brigham Young always derided John Taylor. He told him he was a stupid businessman and that he didn't have the right stuff to do this. And so John Taylor finally gave up, and Brigham Young took over the operation, and Brigham Young couldn't make it work either. But eventually in California, someone figured out how to make sugar beets and get sugar out of sugar beets. And Utah really had a perfect climate for growing sugar beets. So Wilford Woodruff, and I don't know where this is because they never did put it in the Doctrine and Covenants, but he had a revelation that sugar beets was the future of Utah and the church, and he put everything into sugar beets.
Now, who was this? Woodruff?
This was Wilford Woodruff, and he even said somewhere in here I have it, but he said that basically that he would bankrupt the church if he had to get the sugar beet industry going. And that's basically what he did. He almost bankrupted the church trying to get the sugar beet factory going. Of course, this all started during the polygamy raids at the same time, and he's trying to get, and so the church ends up almost bankrupt trying to start this sugar beet process. But eventually they get the sugar beets running, and the church is able to buy up some of these factories that they tried to start up at pennies on the dollar. And they start producing sugar. Well, sugar was like king at this time. It was just like oil and, all of the big trusts that, railroads, oil, banking, all of those. Sugar was one of those big trusts. And back east, it was owned by a guy, I can't remember his name, Halverson or something like that, owned the sugar trust. It was called American Sugar. And they got in trouble with the anti-sugar trust issues and were getting broken up. Well, so they started looking for sugar places that they could buy. The church happened to own Utah Idaho Sugar at the time, and they said they needed money. They were looking for a place, so the two married up and formed this consolidation. American Sugar was kind of the parent company of Utah Idaho Sugar.
Yeah.
And people say that the reason that the people back east invested so heavily in it was because the Mormon Church had complete control of the people. And when you think about that, who was raising sugarcane back in this time? Who raised all the sugarcane and did all the hard work in the fields for the sugar industry? It was the slaves.
Slaves.
You had the slaves in Cuba, the slaves in the South. Louisiana was a big sugarcane producer. Civil War came, no more slaves.
No more slaves.
But it was a very labor-intensive
so
industry.
Utah could get its people to do the work.
Utah had immigrants, poor immigrants coming in, needed work. Sugar beets is a good place to work, and the church had complete control over these people. And that's exactly what ended up happening. They started taking advantage of that. They controlled completely the market. They had conference talks about that you need to support Utah Idaho Sugar, that the local farmers could only grow for Utah Idaho Sugar. The sugar beets could only be grown for Utah Idaho Sugar. They basically kept the prices down in the market by getting rid of all the other competition. And they started building all of these sugar mills, and you can see them still today. If you go south of Spanish Fork, there's a big one sitting right off the side of the road. Is an old sugar mill. I think you're up in Idaho Falls, Sugar City, Idaho, that area.
Yep.
The
Sugar
first one
City,
was in
Idaho.
Lehigh. Lehigh was the first one they did. Layton, I'm here in the Layton area. Layton had one. Sugar became king in Utah, and the church owned
as it still is. If I could just interject, right? It still is.
Yes, it's now just swig, and
it's one of the approved vices.
I'll drink to that.
That's for sure.
That's right. That's right.
So the church got in trouble with this antitrust because they were controlling completely the market, and the farmers were complaining that they had the lowest rate in the country they were getting the lowest rates for their produce. So the church, by controlling its people, was keeping the prices down. And then on top of it, they got to take 10% of whatever they made because they were all members of the church. They're getting the tithing off of it, but they're getting them at a reduced rate, and they're producing them in their factories that they would then sell. And then they tell the members, you got to buy Utah Idaho Sugar. You got to support the church. We got to be self-sufficient.
Against their own members.
Against their own members.
Mm-hmm.
And
their own farmers.
And this began, it began as a self-sufficiency thing. That's what it began as. But as the war and stuff came, they became part of a national economy. And the church wasn't prepared to be a national economy. And the national economy wasn't ready for a business that was run by ecclesiastical leaders telling its people what to do. And the two had a bunch of clashes. And so Utah Idaho Sugar was owned by the church. Joseph F. Smith was the president of the church, of the sugar company. He got called back to Washington to give testimony in the Sugar Act trials, and he refused to go. He said, "I'm not going until they had to basically what's it called, an affidavit or whatever you have to do to force you to come back." He made him do that to make him come back before he would testify, because he knew nothing about the sugar industry. The people who were running the sugar industry, who were doing all of these acts that they were under investigation from the Department of Justice, I think the Department of Agriculture. There was like 4 different government agencies that were investigating Utah Idaho Sugar for antitrust things. And guess who happened to be running the Idaho Sugar companies at the time? Let's read this. It says, Floyd T. Jackson of the Department of Justice filed a complaint charging the Utah Idaho Company of profiteering and obtaining undue, exorbitant, immoderate, excessive, and monstrous profits on sugar. Merrill Nibley, Charles Nibley's son. Remember that name? That was one of the highlighted names of the people that came in to save the church. Vice president and assistant manager of the company was arrested. The company embarked on a propaganda campaign in the Utah market. The Idaho Division of Department of Justice filed charges against the company on June 10, 1920, specifically charging Heber J. Grant, Charles W. Nibley, and Thomas R. Cutler, among others. Warrants for their arrests were issued on June 21st, 1920.
Charles Nibley was Hugh Nibley's grandfather.
Yes, and he was the president. He was the presiding bishop at the time.
He was the presiding bishop.
So he was in charge of getting the church's finances, him and Heber J. Grant, who later became the prophet. They all had arrest warrants put out. This stemmed from after the war, there were price controls on sugar, and they had to sell it for a certain price. And Utah, Idaho said, we're not doing it. And they went and had a board vote, and the board voted that they were going to sell the sugar, and they were supposed to sell it at like 13 cents a pound, and they sold it at 28 cents a pound. It turned out they didn't charge Heber J. They dropped the charges on Heber J. Grant because he actually voted against raising the prices, but the other guys on the board outvoted him. So the company still ended up raising the prices and breaking the law. So we're going to do, this is another podcast we want to do. We're going to call it like Pour Some Sugar on Me, the Joseph Fielding Smith story or something.
The Joseph Fielding Smith story. There you go.
But it's fascinating. I got a whole book here. It's a book written by, he's actually a church historian, Matthew Godfrey. And there's an entire book on this, and it's just fascinating because
on the sugar thing,
because they not only did they own the sugar mills, they owned the legislature too. So they controlled all the labor laws, and so
nothing's changed.
They couldn't do anything. The farmers are going, this isn't fair, and they wouldn't even have a hearing on it or anything because the church controlled the legislature. So it's a fascinating story, and we're going to tell more on that. But this is
I'm looking forward to that one.
These antitrust things is what got them in trouble in 1915, that they said, oh, we need to make this more transparent, because the church was paying the debts for these private companies that they were owning. They owned portions of the company, and then they were using their influence to control the company and to control the market.
That is blitzoid, man. Wow.
So again, we see several, another potential leader of the church is involved with the law. So, okay,
another one.
We're almost done. We're down to the last part here, and then we've got a couple other things to go over. So,
yep, we're doing good.
See, is it my turn now? We took that little detour into sugar, which was fabulous. I feel like I'd like a donut now. I don't know. There's something about it. So maybe when we're done. All right, here we go. After decades of surplus spending and careful planning, the faithful contributions of Latter-day Saints resulted in the church building significant reserves, much of which church leaders reinvested, saved for the future, or used for humanitarian and urban renewal projects around the world. Beginning in 2013, the church produced an annual report detailing its spending on humanitarian efforts. In 2019, Church President Russell M. Nelson directed the merger of the Corporation of the Presiding Bishop and the Corporation of the President, and the resulting corporation was renamed, everybody say it with me, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That same year, the First Presidency reiterated their commitments to using sacred church funds wisely. This is a quote: "We take seriously the responsibility to care for the tithes and donations received from members. The vast majority of these funds are used immediately to meet the needs of the growing church, including more meeting houses, temples, education, humanitarian work, and missionary efforts throughout the world."
So there you have it.
That's the end of the essay.
Yep, that's the end of the essay. That takes us up to modern times.
Everything is glorious, good, and incredible.
That's right. You can just.
We love this place. It's so sweet to belong to this church.
They've done some good things, and I'm not going to take that away. The church does do some good things. There's some good humanitarian.
Absolutely.
But some of these you look at, that you look at that highlighted section in the last paragraph there. That same year, 2019, the First Presidency reiterated their commitment to using sacred church funds wisely. Why did they do that? What happened in 2019? The
Wait, I know this. I know the answer. Yeah.
Yes.
The whistleblower. Yeah.
The whistleblower came out, and it's just like we cooperated with these people. It's like in 2019, we reiterated that. They reiterated it because a whistleblower came out and said, hey, they have all these money that nobody knows about that they said that they weren't using on, building the malls and stuff. And they really were. And it was coming from tithing funds. And now all of a sudden
everything the church has, does, builds, steals, whatever, if it's from money, it's based on tithing.
Yeah, somehow
they wouldn't be able to do anything without the base of tithing. So realistically, everything they do is tithing money.
Yeah, absolutely. Even their for-profit businesses that are making profits, they switch those back and forth. They move them back and forth as whatever gives them the best tax. If they're right. Let's move it. Let's take this farmland and we'll make it farmland and we'll make it tax exempt. And then for 20 years, we'll get a tax exemption on it. And then we'll move it and make condos on it. We'll move it to our for-profit, so for 20 years, they didn't have to pay any taxes on it. And now they move it to their for-profit. They sell it. They profit off of it. They get they play that game all the time and they make money on it. So the question is, and we all know this, and some of these slides coming up, they come off of the John DeLynn, RFM, Rebecca, and Spencer were doing this. All did this show on the Widow's Mite report. Some of these came out of that Widow's Mite report from that show. So if you want to show those, we just look at some of those numbers and see what those really show. And, they make it sound like these were humanitarian urban renewal projects around the world, like they're building,
sorry, I'm trying to get coordinated. Is this
no problem? It sounds like they're building wells in Congo, or that they're, doing, helping poor countries in urban development is what it sounds like they're doing. And what we find is, that if you look at this graph here on the left, of the $1 billion that they claim, $906 billion, only 80 to 100 million, or 10% of that, actually went to humanitarian aid. The rest of that went to themselves. It's basically internal church welfare. That they counted missionary program as humanitarian effort. So they're out teaching the gospel to people who they then convert, who then pay money to them, and that's considered humanitarian.
I'd like to know what salary they prescribe to the volunteers. I would think their hourly rate, I guess, is more what it would be. I'm not sure. So
I would love to know what a missionary should make, or what
I would love to know
missionary
too.
Worth. Yeah.
But again, don't you think the Widow's Mite report, it was just absolutely incredible. If anybody has a chance to work their way through that, it was just amazing, the amount of research that was put into it and just the insights. I thought it was incredible. And I think another interesting point to make is that every time the church has become more transparent or said, okay, it's an external force, wouldn't you say, that's acting on them? Something has come out, there's a whistleblower, there's some kind of antitrust accusation. Anytime they seem to voluntarily become more transparent, it's a direct reaction to something externally that has happened. And I think that happens not just in finance. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
Which is why we have to do what we're doing, because
that's a good point.
It's the pressure from outside that makes them start doing these things. And you look, and in fact, this pressure, you look at that graph on the right, it shows how much they gave between 1985 and 2015. They claim they gave $2.3 billion. And once that was exposed of how much they had and how little they gave, all of a sudden, that one on the left, where they gave $1 billion in 1 year, the church realized and said, we've got to do something. But again, did they actually do something, or did they just try to be non-transparent and make it look like they gave $1 billion when they really weren't giving any more than they gave? And that's what we see, is they just, it goes back to that reporting. They reported something differently than they reported before, so it looked like they gave a lot more of it.
Right.
And they, again, we're not transparent with what they're doing. And we're seeing that these reports they're giving are, again, not very useful because we don't know what they're using them for. So humanitarian aid, they could do so much more with humanitarian aid, especially with all the problems in the world today. And it's a very small percentage of what they're giving.
Well, even if they did give that billion, we honestly don't know. I mean, how much of that was given to something that would directly benefit the church? They've done that before too. So even though they can claim, yeah, we're doing charity here and there and thus and so forth, a lot of it now we're finding is just the reason they gave to that particular charity or did this particular thing with their money is because directly or indirectly, it put it right back in the church's lap.
Exactly. It comes
and
back to
$1 billion is still far under 1% of their total wealth. They aren't even sending tithing amounts of money to charity.
Yep. And again, that goes back to they're not a charity, they're a religious organization, so they don't have to give it away. They can keep as much as they want because they're not a charitable organization.
Well, Jesus said, hoard your money for a rainy day. I know it's somewhere there.
That's my favorite scripture, mastery scripture. I love that one.
Yeah. I read it every day. I do the same thing now. Yeah.
So just a couple more slides and then we'll let your audience go. But
your captive audience go, right?
A couple other issues here. You can see this is some of the urban renewal projects that they did. And amazingly, if you look at each of these, City Creek Center, I couldn't get a picture with this, but from City Creek Center, you can see the Salt Lake Temple in the background. Mm-hmm. The one there on the lower right is Mesa, Arizona, where they did an urban renewal of the neighborhoods around the temple. They gave money to the city to do urban renewal. The neighborhood prospered from it, sure. But so did the church. The church prospered from that.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, sorry, I jumped the gun on you. Yeah.
And the one on the left is the Philadelphia Temple, and that high-rise tower off to the right, owned by the church. That's their development that went on with it. So again, they developed something that they're now selling. Is that humanitarian? Is that urban? They're not building wells in the Congo. They're building real estate empires. And that's really what we're seeing out of this. Yes, I'm sure they do some of the other stuff, but is this what Jesus taught? I don't think so. This is not what people think their money is going for. And if that's what you want to give your money for, is to build this again, as long as you know that's what it's going for, great.
That's the key.
Yeah, but and I'm, I come across as somewhat snooty when I say this. I don't mean to, I promise. But when I was in Salt Lake, it's mortifying. I have never seen this before. Coming off the interstate ramp. Now, see, I'm in my fancy car and I get to wear good clothes and all that. I get that, honest. But when I pulled off the interstate to turn onto State Street to head up toward Temple Square, there was an entire cardboard town under the interstate ramp, people in tents, sleeping bags, cardboard houses on both sides of the interstate. And it was that way at every cotton picking off ramp. And everywhere throughout the streets of Salt Lake City, you see these poor people begging. They're walking. I never saw anything like that at all throughout my 20s, my teenager 20 years. There were no people out on the street begging you for money or living in cardboard shanties underneath the interstates. And then every single bathroom, every single extra room in any of the buildings, the restaurants, etc., are locked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm going, what has happened here in Salt Lake City? They have thousands of homeless. And the wider they build out City Creek, Temple Square, the church office building, when my buddy and I were walking and going through City Creek Mall, and I know, I get it. I'm one of the privileged. I understand this. I get to go into the mall and all. Did you see anybody except the well-dressed and rich? Anywhere in the great big skyscraper part of Salt Lake City, oh, hell no. They don't even let them even walk there. It's appalling.
And I think I take it, except, I said, if you want to pay into this, that's fine. But the church, if this is what they're going to do with it, they need to be paying taxes on this money, because they're getting this tax break because they're supposed to be taking care of these type of people. And the government says, if you're going to take care of them, we'll give you a tax break. But if you're building real estate and doing all of this, and the community's not getting tax revenue off of that to solve these other problems out there, that's a problem. So it's everybody's problem, whether you're LDS, in the church, out of the church. If you're out of the church, you're paying higher taxes because the church owns so much of this property that they're not paying taxes on, that it increases the tax burden on everybody else, including those who aren't members.
And everyone loses. People that need help, people that want to donate, everyone loses. So I totally agree.
Yeah. Think how much more money Salt Lake City would have if all the properties owned by the church were taxable and paid property taxes to help deal with that problem downtown. And we saw it today at General Conference. We went to General Conference. We dropped off
into conference. We couldn't get a ticket. No, but we went. We were not in conference. We were sort of and around conference. Yeah, we were downtown. But yeah, no, it's absolutely heartbreaking. It absolutely is. It was such a juxtaposition to see everyone walking, so many people walking to the conference center, and then just see some of the other situations. It was absolutely heartbreaking.
And it was so bad that we had driven up, and Rebecca and her husband had dropped off their car. And then I drove them up, and I was going to go back the rest of the way to my house, and they were going to ride tracks back down to their car. And we couldn't find a track station where we dared drop Rebecca off because the homeless situation was so bad down there.
No, it was heartbreaking.
Just driving her back to the cars because it didn't make sense. It was so
it was really overwhelming. I mean, it absolutely was. And if you haven't, I have not been downtown for a while, and it was.
I almost had culture shock like I did when I got to St. Louis on my mission, and I thought, wait a minute, this is my Salt Lake City that I loved as a kid. Well, and then from the interstate, driving through Salt Lake, it was always such fun to look over and say, okay, there's the temple. There's the temple.
Yeah.
You can't see anything except great big office buildings.
Yeah. And the church owns a lot of those office buildings. Yep.
It's all about the money.
Yep. So let's go to we got two more slides.
Am I already ahead of you?
Nope. Nope. Go the next slide that has the first presidency on it.
I don't have one that has the first presidency. You only sent me 24 slides.
We may not have the entire slide deck.
Last one.
There you go.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened. The last slide should have been one that I call "Follow the Prophet," and I'm going to have to describe it to you then.
I'm sorry. Maybe I can look for it real quick.
I think it's fine. I think Lennon can just
it may
describe
not have
it.
Converted, but on this "Follow the Prophet" slide, I have 10 prophets. And with that, we kind of followed that the 10 most wanted slide that we had earlier. The first slide, these are the prophets of the church that we were told had the revelation and control the money. We already went through Joseph Smith with the treason and the bigamy and the fraud and the treasure digging. Brigham Young, the counterfeiting, the murder, the bigamy. John Taylor was counterfeiting, 2 counts of counterfeiting and bigamy. Wilford Woodruff, the 4th president, fled his arrest warrant for bigamy, so he was pursued by federal government, was breaking the law. Lorenzo Snow was convicted of bigamy and served 11 months in prison for his bigamy, so he's the 5th president of the church. Joseph F. Smith fled arrest warrant and was in hiding for bigamy for 7 years, and he was also taken to a trial for attempted manslaughter when he, as an apostle, beat his neighbor with his cane and hit him a couple times with his cane and injured him for life. And so he was tried for attempted manslaughter, but of course you're never going to convict a apostle in Salt Lake City, and they ended up dropping the charges. He was also charged with unlawful cohabitation after the manifesto. He continued to live with his wives after the second manifesto, and so he was charged with unlawful cohabitation. Heber J. Grant fled arrest warrant for unlawful cohabitation. He had an arrest warrant filed for antitrust violations as well, and that was the one that was dropped. So there's our next president. And then we jump up, and so we see that, you know, through the first 7 presidents, every one of them was in trouble with the law. The church
I got it.
overrode the federal law. There was no respect for the federal law, and that just continued through the church. And so the last one, there we go. The last one there with Gordon, I've got Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas Monson, and Russell M. Nelson. They were all involved in the SEC. And I said fine for the church was actually fined for the fraud, but it was for the fraud that was committed under their stewardship. You look at that. That's 10 out of the 17. I think there's been 17 church
Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow, Joseph F. Smith. Didn't you have that story from Joseph F. Smith and his cane?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gordon Hinckley. Yeah, look at that, you guys. Holy nightmare for a TBM. Of course, this is just anti-Mormon lies.
Yeah, there's no respect for the federal law. The church has always had this. We follow our law. We follow God's law. It's a higher law, and whatever we decide, the federal government can.
And Akeem Kamara says, "I want that slide, Landon." I can't blame him. We'll see what we can do for you, Akeem. I've got a copy of it, and so does Landon. So that needs to be a poster, you guys. As far as that goes,
it really lays out that when you want to say the church has always been honest with their finances, it just it defies all logic because they have always been the same way that we've just seen. They will hide it. They will not tell their members where the money's going. That's always been the way it is. And once you understand that, again, if you want to give your money to that is absolutely fine. But at a minimum, they need to be paying taxes on this money because they have an unfair advantage in business. They have an unfair advantage. My kids live in Utah. They cannot afford a house. They're both working adults with children, and they can't afford houses. And the church owns so much of the property, and they drive up the prices because they can outbid everybody for the properties they want. They build all these church buildings, and until they're playing on a fair playing ground with everybody else, we're going to.
They have a monopoly and an advantage in all of that, but the advantage in spirituality, we now see the reality.
Yes.
They don't have that anymore.
No.
And the advantage of being able to control people whom they keep in ignorance, good people like Dan Vogel and RFM and you two and myself and Steve Pinecker and John DeLynn and all, we're not letting them get away with this shit anymore. And I apologize in advance for any Mormon who might be offended, but you can't possibly find any other better descriptive word than what we've been watching tonight with the stupid, heinous approach that these guys have taken.
Yeah, and this stuff is hard to find. I actually saw someone had said on Joseph Smith that he was actually convicted of a felony and attempted manslaughter, but I could never find the source for that. So I just put down.
Do you mean Joseph F. Smith? Are you talking about Joseph F. Smith? And
Joseph F. Smith.
Yeah, that he was actually convicted.
So he about beat a man to death?
Willard Richards style. The cane.
His cows came on his property, and Joseph F. Smith was known for his furious. He was a very hothead. And this was while he was an apostle. Yeah. The guy's cows came on his property, and he went over and he beat him with his cane. The man was about 10 years older than him, and the man said that his life would be shortened. The doctors told him his life would be shortened as a result of the beating he took. But of course, he's an apostle of the Lord, and they came to the trial, and it all worked it out. and he forgave him and released the charges.
You know what, though, that nice little scoop. So that, well, I am one of the church leaders and all. Maybe that's why they felt they had to make so much money, because that kind of clout, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing in conversations and all, it's just not there anymore. I mean, and just to tell you what I mean, as an example, my own mom, 92 years old, absolutely staunch faithful. She puts Russell Nelson to shame for righteousness. I am not kidding. This woman is incredible. Last year, when we asked her, how did you like conference? She said, I didn't watch it. What? Why not? Oh, it's the same old, same old.
Yeah.
Wow.
And can you think, with all this money, the changes they could make in the world? How exciting it would be to be part of this church if they would make real changes in the world.
The key to their wealth, though, Landon, the key to their wealth is to get you thinking of the next world.
Exactly.
We're only pilgrims here. This isn't the right world. Don't worry about, by the way, give us the money, your money from this world, but we'll promise you the great blessings in the next world. And it's like Mike on John DeLynne's Mormon Story said, he said, it's all based on treasure digging. Yeah, Joseph could see the treasure, but you could never acquire it. Or at least so they can see the treasure. Oh, your glory in the celestial world now. Oh, folks, you men especially. Oh, maybe millions of women out there. Build your own planet. You got it made, boys. But there's no treasure there. But they get all the goods here.
Yes.
That's
the huge advantage over any other business at gaining wealth. They take your money for something. They don't have to deliver a product.
That's right.
They never ship. Never.
They never ship.
They never ship.
What they're doing is believing. That's why they emphasize that. Belief. Yeah, it's
absolutely. Yeah.
It's blitzoid. So, anything else, you guys? Don't we have like 50 or 60 more of these? I mean, we're just warmed up.
You can literally take any of these slides.
115 people in the audience.
Oh,
you
my
guys
goodness.
are awesome. We love this audience. These guys rock. Looks like they've been having fun in the chat too.
Yeah, I didn't get
well,
to
and
see
I have
that,
to say,
so
can I say, Carrie, that you can tell that Landon is extraordinarily passionate about sugar beets. I mean, he literally almost talks about nothing else to any of us that interact with him socially.
I've got a whole book here. I'm going through.
Oh my goodness, look at
that. As crazy as me. No wonder we get along.
So we were hoping, Landon, that when we do our episode, or helping Carrie, that when we do our episode on Mormonish, that you would come on with us to talk about the beets, because that's your heritage. The sugar beets are in your blood. I can tell. And so I think it would be awesome. So maybe we can set that up if you'd like to come on.
What a nice invitation.
Yeah, because honestly, who else would come on to talk about beets? We couldn't think of anyone else. So it's you.
You know what we'll do? We'll just feed it.
Beat it. There's a lot of songs, like Landon mentioned, Pour Some Sugar on Me and Beat It. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So
yeah, that could have a lot of fun. It's going to be a sweet episode, no doubt.
Well, yeah, let's do that. I'll come on to
I think we'll do it. Yep, we'll do it. Stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing, because I remember that entire episode, man. Really, truly, it was right here in my own hometown, and it was
a lot of people don't know.
It was a big deal when they shut that big factory.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They don't know.
I still got pictures. The silos and all the old factory is still there. Someone in the chat was saying there's several old sugar factories in some of the, like Shelley, Idaho, and outside of Blackfoot, Idaho. And I mean, they're still all over, but yeah, that's what a fiasco. Yeah. And it was against their own people. Now,
yeah,
I mean, they benefited from having sugar inland, but they didn't prosper like the church prospered.
No, they exploited.
They could have, And I look at Eastern Idaho even today, and I always say, why is this so economically depressed compared to like the Salt Lake area?
Well, another part of the problem is I'm gonna just tell you in advance, and this is probably gonna label me, and I'm not gonna go.
Carrie thinks twice. It does happen sometimes.
Well, the way I want to say it is extremely straightforward and okay. Here's how else. Okay, you know why? God, Idaho is so depressed because the Mormons in the legislature voted and convinced everyone to make it a right to work state. And they chased out the unions and chased out all the workers' rights to work. And we're lucky to make a dime an hour after taxes.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the unions, they tried to establish the unions in the sugar beet plants, and that'll be in the episode.
And the church beat it down. The church beat it down. So all roads lead back to beets. I'm telling you. It sounds boring, but it's fascinating.
What they've convinced everybody in Idaho through their absolute bullshit brainwashing, and because Idaho can't quite put it together to say no, a simple 2-letter word, they have virtually enslaved the state to their good. Yeah. So, I mean, that I know that makes me sound like sour grapes and all. I get it. Just come live in the state for a few years and you'll get it real quick.
I lived there for about 5 years in Napa.
The weather is always much better here, but yeah, there's just something about the politics and I shouldn't get into this subject because I'm kind of, Shut up, Terry.
Hot button.
Oh, boy. I would be honored to come onto your show and let's continue this discussion.
I think we do.
This is just so rich in history that absolutely every one of us probably can relate to in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just history. I mean, it's a pattern that continues. That's what's interesting to me. You can delve into it, but then you can see echoes of it today, and it all goes back and forth. And so it's very relevant. It's very relevant.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, you begin to understand why MLMs are so popular in Mormon culture when you start understanding how they controlled certain industries. And, the stake president would tell you, you buy sugar from here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
You start seeing where these things came from and why they're popular.
It's in our blood.
My brother constantly told me about the latest rage in Utah. He'd come up, you've got to join this. All right, I'll listen to a spiel. How much? Well, this one's only $199 to get in and all that. Yeah.
Do you own shares in the Dream Mine, Carrie? I just feel like you're the kind of person that might.
About the 30th time he showed up, and this one was the real deal. This is it. My stake president knows this. He knows the 70 who's the head of this, and they're good friends, and they have prayed this one will work, Carrie. And he said the 70 has made $1.5 million in the last 2 weeks, and the state president has made $750,000 in 2 weeks. So this is the real thing. And I told my brother, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'm in when you show me your check stub of $500,000 2 weeks from now in the bank.
There you go.
And from that point on, he never, and that was 20 years ago, he never approached me with
and you're still waiting.
Yeah, and he never did make any money on any of the 20 he joined. So I've got personal experience with that too.
Wow.
So it's crazy stuff. So okay, you guys, I love you. This has been so much fun. It's been so educational. Look at this. We still have our full audience, you guys. That's how good you are.
Shocked.
I love my audience. I love your audience. And thank you so much to the audience. Thanks for sticking with us. I told you, these guys were going to be fun to listen to, and they had a whopping program tonight, did I not? Now, again, pass the word on, if you would, to my audience. I've accepted their wonderful invitation, and with Landon's research skills and
She's
Rebecca's
awesome.
practical understanding and research skills and the backyard professor's ridiculous antics, we're bound to put on another good show on the sugar beet stuff. So yeah, keep in touch with us, and we will put some more together for you. And we're going to head out now, though. So appreciate all of your support and love, and I hope you enjoyed the show. It looks like you did. Hey, you guys, Landon, Reb, it looks like up here I've got 3 laughing faces. I've never seen those before. So apparently we've really been a good show tonight.
Well, are they laughing with us or at us?
Yeah,
That's
that's-
there
that's
might be a very fine line there, but I'll take it as a good sign. That's okay. Glass
I
half
got
full
used
kind
to
of a
being
thing.
laughed at when I was in first grade on. So I don't mind that. So you got to laugh and have some fun. So, they say y'all are sweeter than sugar. I think they're talking to each other.
Sweeter than sugar beets. That's it.
Yeah. We've got rainbow hearts from the, hey, let me acknowledge right here the former world champion wrestler. I've had him on my show, Mark.
Awesome. Wow.
You, my friend, look at that, rainbow hearts. Look at this guy. He's a champion in way more ways than just wrestling. So thank you for being here, Mark. Good to see you. And my dear friend Debbie Donovan and Lee Mortensen. Oh, thank you. And IKU Studies. I've seen you post some, and Don Smith. Gosh, now I'm going to have to go through. Oh, Gail Capson. I'm going to have to go through and say hi to all of them. Here we go. Jewel Brown.
It's like romper room.
Heather Reddick. I mean, all these guys are such a... Jeff Taylor. I'm telling you. Tiger. I'm going to say that because that's how he spells his name. Ryan Hollis, good man. Oh, Mormon book reviews. Woohoo!
Is it Steve? Hi, Steve. You need to call me tomorrow, Steve. We have stuff to work out. So.
Beaver. Yeah, baby. He just got in, apparently. Yes. Welcome, my friend. Our friend. All our friends. So anyway, yeah. Good to see all of you. I'm glad Jeff Taylor. I said, looks like, you guys are just awesome. RF William Charles. Yes. Good to see you, bud. I love William. We have so much fun in the chat. That man is brilliantly funny. We have so much fun in the chat on Mormonism Live. I think sometimes Maven threatens to kick both of us off because we're making everybody laugh too hard. He has just got a brain like a genius, man. So anyway, we're still recording. I got to be careful and say nice. Okay, you guys. I'm sorry for
live.
keeping you so late too. Yeah, we are live. So. All right, thanks, you guys. Good to see you all. Appreciate you. Don't forget, I've got new podcasts, the listening ones on the backyardprofessor.org for your listening pleasure. And don't forget Mormonish and the book club. And these two are just doing sensational podcasts. I'm really... The thing that makes me mad right now these days is I'm not retired because there's so many fantastic podcasts. Yeah. Have you guys noticed that? I mean,
same thing here.
Not enough time. Not enough time at all.
It's just fabulous. Although it does make work go faster. When I do have to travel, I turn on your podcast and Delim and RFM and all these guys. So fun stuff.
Wait,
okay.
In that order?
No. I'm never going to reveal what.
I'm totally kidding, John and RFM. We would never presume to be.
You're going to get me kicked in the shins, Rebecca. I'm just saying. All right, you guys, we're going to head out of here. Thank you again so much. You two stick around. I'll talk to you in a minute after the ending.